Hey, it's the opening day of our Free Speech TV Fund Drive. We really need you to call now and support Free Speech TV. Let's try to make this thing as short as possible, and kick off this day with a real punch. With a $1,000 gift, you can come to Portland and hang out in the studio for the last hour of our show, and then we'll go have lunch together and chat about whatever's on your mind. Sometimes people come and they want to share things that they've been doing with me or books that they've written or whatever. Other times they come and they have lots of questions, or sometimes they just want to come and see what it all looks like here. It's like, this is not a big fancy television station. It's a funky little homemade studio in an office building, and we do a lot with it. And it's kind of cool to come over and see it. And if you do come for the meet and greet, that $1,000 meet and greet, be sure to ask me to show you the back room, which is where all the electronics are. It's just so, it's geek paradise, which is me. I just love it. So anyhow, that's the $1,000 gift. With a $250 gift, you get the online class with Professor Thom. I don't normally refer to myself as professor, but it's a virtual meet and greet. It's an hour that we'll spend on a computer on Zoom. You can just listen in, or you can also put your face on and we can see each other. It's up to you. You will be able to see me and hear me, and I'll be able to answer any questions you have, and I'm there for you. That's with a $250 gift. With a $360 gift, I'm kind of jumping around here. We have Study Up with Professor Thom. It's a 3-book package. It's and all 3 of these books are new. They've all come out in this last year. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, and ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World. And if you know anybody who's challenged by or gifted with ADHD, I think you'll find it fascinating. It just came out, literally just in the last month or 3. With a $120 gift, we've got the Never Again Is Now T-shirt, referencing, obviously, Mr. Trump. With a $50 gift, there's the Nobody is Above the Law tote bag. And with a $20 gift, Gravity, the only law Trump hasn't broken, bumper sticker. So that's a good one. That's a really good one. So anyhow, those are the premiums that we're offering. But I think more importantly is just your opportunity. This is your opportunity to support Free Speech TV. And Free Speech TV has worked it out now that sustaining gifts are really sustaining, both for them and for our program and from you, which is just a wonderful thing. If you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, whatever it may be, sustaining memberships are really where it's at. Hopefully we can work out exactly what kind of gifts might be associated with what sustaining memberships, because these are all the one-time gifts. But sustaining memberships are really important, because what they do is this is where you're committing to say yes every month, ding my credit card for a certain amount. And for, most people who give on a sustaining membership basis, it's a small amount of money that basically is barely noticed. I mean, $5 a month or $10 a month, or for some people $20 a month, or even $100 or a few $100s a month, depending on their income, is that small amount that they just can have deducted from their credit card. But what it allows Free Speech TV to do is budget. It allows them to say, okay, we know that going into this next quarter or into this next year, we will have this amount of money at this time. And so they can plan. They can say, okay, we can, on October, we'll be able to add a new show. Or starting in November, we'll be able to do some new outreach and, maybe buy some ads or some billboards or something telling people about Free Speech TV. I would really love to see Free Speech TV doing some outreach. And it's the sustaining gifts that actually enable that. So whether you want to give a one-time gift and get one of these goodies here, or whether you want to give a sustaining gift and really be a good, solid, long-term partner with Free Speech TV, please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. Free Speech TV needs you. There is basically no real progressive television out there. I mean, MSNBC tries to pretend that they're progressive television. They're owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing organization, basically it was started by a right-wing family out of Florida. And the station is littered with Republicans from one end to the other, and not to mention commercials. But Free Speech TV is it. So if you can't make a gift, or even if you can, but in particular, if you can't call now 877-378-8669 to make a gift, there is something you can do to help Free Speech TV. And that is get somebody else hooked on this show and on this network. Share it with a friend. Tell people about it on Facebook. Tell people about it on Twitter. Tell your people in your book club or your next door neighbor or at the PTA about Free Speech TV and how they can find it, how you find it, how you watch this show. And bring in other people who may be able to be donors. And let's expand the base of Free Speech TV. We really need your help now. 877-378-8669. Thanks so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Thursday. What an amazing news day. Fiona Hill, the former National Security Council Senior Director for Europe and Russia, and David Holmes, who works at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, or what used to be pronounced as Kiev. I guess it's Kyiv now. Both testifying this morning. So far, we have heard them being questioned by the Democrats. And right now, the entire committee is in break because they had to go vote on some legislation on the floor of the House of Representatives. And then when they come back, it's going to be the Republicans' turn to ask them the questions. And I think that's going to get real interesting because Fiona Hill is basically saying, you Republicans, particularly Devin Nunes, you Republicans are promoting a conspiracy theory that literally came out of Russia, that came out of the out of some kind of Russian disinformation campaign, and then David Holmes is saying that he heard Trump ask Sondland at lunch. He overheard the phone call. Trump is tweeting out, "You can't overhear a phone call. I've been doing it my whole life. Nobody can overhear it." And Connie Schultz, the reporter and wife of the Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, she tweeted out saying, I was sitting in the back seat when you were talking to a certain person we both know, presumably Sherrod Brown, and I could hear every word you said. Your voice carries. And a bunch of other people, I guess Anderson Cooper or somebody on CNN tried it live on the air, and they succeeded in doing it. So that's going on. At the same time, Benjamin Netanyahu is just indicted for fraud and a couple of other basically corruption issues. And so that's going on. Israel, of course, failed to form a government, or the opposition character, fellow failed to form a government yesterday. And then we had the Democratic debates last night. And so what I'm going to do is pick up your calls, now and on and off throughout the day, whenever there's a break, and when the interrogation is back on, when the Intelligence Committee, the Impeachment Committee is back live, we will go to that, as long as it's interesting. I mean, I'm guessing once again when it gets to the members' questions that I'll probably be hopping in and doing summaries and offering commentary, in particular on top of some of the Republicans. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes. So, these are some of the many things that are going on in the world today. Oh, my thoughts on last night's debate. I don't think anybody really hurt themselves last night. I think probably the person who helped themselves the most was Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar also. Both of them did good performances, although Amy seemed to be, I don't know if there was an air vent above her because her hair was, fluttering there, or if she's got a little tremble, but it looked kind of strange. Maybe more hairspray next time around. But other than that, and my first thought was, is this going to be kind of a Nixon moment? And then I thought, this will just slide by, and nobody's going to be, obsessed on that. I thought that Cory Booker saying to Joe Biden, "You're saying marijuana is a gateway drug? Are you high?" Was great. Joe Biden had a comeback all ready for it. We're going to let all these people out of jail who are there for marijuana, but he wants to decriminalize but not legalize. I thought that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders both did excellent jobs last night. Pete Buttigieg did a good job. You know, I don't think anybody did poorly. Joe Biden was having trouble, grabbing words here and there from time to time, and we've seen him do that in every single one of the debates. And apparently, that's something that he's just, hey, that's Joe. I don't know if he's always been that way or if this is something new, but apparently it's not a big issue, at least among the TV commentariat. So we've had 2 days of impeachment hearings, and we had the Democratic debates last night. I'm curious your thoughts on, where this is all going. It's increasingly looking to me like the Republicans have bought into this disinformation campaign suggesting that Ukraine was who hacked the DNC, not Russia. And, Fiona Hill saying this is coming right out of the Russian intelligence services. Whether that is the case or whether it's coming out of the oligarchs in Russia or some Russian oligarchs or some Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs, keep in mind, one of them is building a factory in Kentucky right now to help Mitch McConnell get reelected. One of the reasons they're calling him Moscow Mitch. I'm still, in my own mind, a little uncertain about which is the issue. I am seeing, frankly, if you want to get into conspiracy theories, I'm seeing a worldwide network, essentially, of billionaire oligarchs who are trying to make the world safe for oligarchy. And this is, in my opinion, not unique to Russia. I mean, it's certainly happened in Russia and is happening in Russia, but it's also happening in Brazil right now. It's how Jair Bolsonaro got in there. It's happening in Ecuador. I think the oligarchs are responsible for the overthrow there. It's you've got Viktor Orban in Hungary. His oligarchic buddies, his billionaire buddies, have bought up all the media. It's happened in Poland, where Duda, the same, President Duda, the same thing. It's happened in the Philippines with Duterte. It's happened in Malaysia. In Indonesia. There's just this, and it's happening in the United States. We have an oligarch now as president. We have a billionaire, or at least somebody who claims to be a billionaire, as president. And he was put into place in part by American oligarchs like Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca, who funded so much of the Trump campaign, and Shelley Adelson and the Koch brothers, down to one brother now, I guess, who are politically active, and it's just like it's oligarchy on parade. And so, I'm less inclined to view Russia as a single source of all evil in the world, and frankly, China is in on it with the oligarchs too. Oh, and one other thing that happened, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. Yesterday, Donald Trump went to a factory in Texas where they're manufacturing Apple products and met Tim Apple there, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple that Trump referred to as Tim Apple recently. And Trump, did a little press conference and said, when I got elected president, I said, they're going to start making stuff here in America. And now, because of me, Apple is manufacturing these things right here in America. And Tim Cook is standing right next to him. This factory opened in like 2013, 2014, something like that. I mean, during Obama's presidency. And Trump was, and it's not even an Apple plant. It's a third-party company. It's a contractor. Apple, by and large, doesn't manufacture their own stuff, just like Nike doesn't make shoes. They have it manufactured by other companies, and then they're basically a brand marketing company, and increasingly a data services company, as is happening, all across this whole area. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. Let's pick up some of yours. Mark in Santa Rosa. Hey, Mark, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm a former nuclear weapons inspector with a top security clearance, DOD, DOE.
Okay.
I have a quick blow-by of what Trump has been doing. If you remember when he got out of North Korea, the first words out of his mouth were, gee, my hotels would look great on their beaches.
That's right.
It shows you he is using sanctions and these tariffs to get hotels on beaches. He orchestrated the killing of the newspaper reporter, sending him to Turkey to pay off his loan with Saudi Arabia for his Twin Towers.
Oh, hang on a second there, Mark. Khashoggi was in Turkey to marry his girlfriend. And that's why he went into the embassy in Saudi Arabia, was he had to get a marriage license.
Authorization by his administration. He then paid off Turkey for allowing them for Saudi Arabia to kill him by allowing them to get the 30 miles of where he brought the 52
of northern Syria
to go in and kill the Kurds.
Yeah.
That's how he paid off his Turkey loans. His Saudi Arabia loans were paid off also by that. Qatar.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're suggesting that Trump has borrowed money from both Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and by giving them, thousands of square miles of northern Syria, they canceled his debt?
People by giving him land, by all these dirty deeds that he's doing. This was all. Do
you have any evidence of that, Mark? Or is this your theory?
It's a theory based on facts of the actions that he's taken.
Oh, I get that his actions, in my mind, really indicate that there's some hidden agenda here. I just assumed that it was future business deals, but having them cancel debt, not impossible. Certainly not impossible. This guy, our grifter in chief, right? The grifter in chief is just, he's going to do what grifters do. He's going to grift. We'll be back at 16 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Also today, the testimony of Fiona Hill, the former NSC Senior Director for Europe and Russia, and David Holmes from the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Professor, it seems I've heard that we're on a clock with respect to this impeachment hearing, that we've got to get this done by a certain time. Why is that? Can't we just continue going on all the way through the election?
I don't think there's any specific clock. In fact, the Republicans are talking about trying to drag it out until February or March.
Okay, the reason why I'm saying that is we're just dealing with one issue, which if the guy put me in charge, I could put a spin on it and rescue him from this, but the guy's personality is such to where you can't control him. But aside from what's going on with the Ukraine thing, we will still have the emoluments issue.
Yep.
We will still have the tax issue.
Yep.
We will still have the obstruction of justice from the Mueller report.
And we would still have paying off porn stars and Playboy bunnies in order to get yourself elected.
So I don't see this thing ending anytime soon based on the speed they're going right now. But I just wanted to know that we were under pressure to get this thing done by a certain time, because I see this thing rolling all the way to the election with the damage this brother's done. What do you think?
It's not inconceivable, Morris. The Republicans are going to try and slow it down as much as they can. The Democrats are going to try and speed it up as much as they can. They really don't want this to be happening in the primary season next year. I could argue either side. I could argue, and I have on this program, that it will actually work to the benefit of the Democrats if it happens during or after the primaries, particularly if the primaries of some of the Republicans who are running. On the other hand, you can see where that's also going. You've got 6 Democratic senators running for president, and it's going to make it harder for them to campaign. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. Thanks a lot, Morris. Michael in Maltby, Washington. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today? Michael? No, Michael. Okay, I'll put Michael on hold, and let's try John in Springfield, Ohio. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I want to focus on 2 things that Fiona Hill said this morning. Mm-hmm. She says our nation is being torn apart by Russia. Hill says we are running out of time to stop Russian 2020 election interference.
Right.
So that tells me that Mitch McConnell's involved in this, too, because he won't bring none of this legislation to the floor of the Senate that the House has passed.
Right. See, I think that they know, Mitch McConnell knows, Trump knows. I mean, all you have to do is read the Mueller report. They know that Russia helped Donald Trump become president, that he owes his presidency in part to Russia. It's largely it was American oligarchs and other things. But, if Russia supplied that extra 1/16th of a percent, one little slice was, just enough to get those 70,000 votes in those 4 states. And so they're hoping that Russia will do the same thing again, because they believe that Russia did it last time. That's what I think is going on with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, the reason why they're refusing to bring up any election integrity legislation. Or they themselves have been hacking the voting machines for years and years, and they know it. It's an inside secret inside the Republican Party. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd go along with you, Tom. You're great.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, John. We'll see how this shakes out. And and the Moscow Mitch thing is really starting to grate on Mitch McConnell. There are billboards up all over Kentucky now, and his approval ratings are going down. So, how it's going to shake out, how it's going to work out, what's going to happen, all of that stuff is up in the air. But I think that it's a fascinating moment in American political history. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day and the hearings in just a few minutes. It looks like the vote is over, but they haven't reconvened the hearings yet. So stick around. We'll be back on the telephone with you in just a moment. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It looks like the vote is over, but the members of Congress haven't come back in again. So we're going to continue our conversation here. Judy in Roselle, Illinois. Hey, Judy, what's up?
Hello?
Hi. What's on your mind?
Just a quick question. I have not been able to find an answer. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason the Mueller report can't be used as is for support of the impeachment articles?
If there is a reason, I think it's that Bill Barr discredited that report, and let everybody believe that for a full month before it came out, number one. Number two, very few people have actually read it. And number three, a couple of days ago, there was an interesting question that was asked about something that, the person was saying, the member of Congress, one of the questioners was saying, this should have been in the Mueller report. Why was this not in the Mueller report? And my answer, and nobody, it was a rhetorical question. My answer is it probably is in the Mueller report. People keep forgetting that Bill Barr redacted large chunks of the Mueller report. And so, there may be some really juicy stuff in the unredacted Mueller report, but that still has not been made available to Congress, by the Department of Justice. So I think that the main thing is that, Judy, is that Nancy Pelosi's strategy is we're just going to focus on one thing that we can prove, and we can prove beyond a doubt, and nobody can dispute it. And, if we can't nail him on this, we can't nail him. And I think she's probably right. Judy, thanks a lot for the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Tom. No, of course you're right. Okay, this is Russia is not the source of all evil in the world. And actually, Colonel Vindman even said it to his credit. And that just shows you what a consummate professional Colonel Vindman is. All right, he said in the long run, these shenanigans Trump is playing is going to hurt Russia in the long run. Right. Okay, because Russia doesn't have a very robust economy yet. They're still, it's still in developing.
Well, and they also need credibility on the international stage in order to enter into economic agreements with other countries. There needs to be a certain level of trust, and to the extent to which this is hurting their trust, it's hurting their country, in my opinion.
No, you're right, and to a very large extent, this is oligarchs that are kind of frenemies with each other. All right, and what I'm saying is I don't know if you ever saw the movie Last of the Mohicans. Remember when the British, he's actually Scottish commander and the French commander they were slaughtering, their soldiers were slaughtering each other all night. Mm-hmm. But when they met on the battlefield, they were they had so much chivalry, so much kindness and respect for one another. That's kind of what we're seeing playing out here. And because these generals like Valery Gerasimov, he came up with the hybrid warfare concept that Russia is using right now. Okay, these generals, and you can take on our side, you can take General McChrystal, General David Petraeus, any of them. Their job ultimately, and they're very clear on this, is to achieve victory at the end of the day.
Right.
So what you have is these oligarchs doing one thing and these generals doing their job on the other hand, and it's creating an extremely dangerous situation. For crying out loud, Kim Jong-un said it himself. He is not meeting with Donald Trump because Donald Trump has not earned another meeting, and Kim Jong-un is no longer going to promote Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Trump gave him a lot. I mean, Trump suspended the South Korean American military cooperative exercises. He basically let Kim get away with making nuclear bombs. And very few consequences. I mean, we still have embargoes on them, which is chafing Kim, but he's figured out ways around them.
Yes, well, Kim Jong-un has gotten more from the Trump transactional foreign policy than his father or grandfather ever dreamed possible, right? Yep. And Kim Jong-un has not even been held power as long, is certainly not as long as Kim Jong-il or Kim Il-sung.
Right, and now he's flipping the bird to us, and to Donald Trump for that matter. And Trump's got to feel pretty burned by that. I mean, it really is a pretty remarkable thing. Dave, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, I just realized another hole in Donald Trump's grift on America that I haven't heard people mentioning yet.
Okay, what's that?
According to, I believe, Taylor's testimony, Donald Trump wanted an announcement released on CNN, and I think Sondland said yesterday that Trump doesn't care about the investigation, he just wants the announcement. This is just evidence and proof that Donald Trump doesn't think CNN is fake news. It's just a load of hooey that he's putting on America.
Well, I riffed on this yesterday. I thought that was probably the most important thing that came out, was the fact that Trump didn't care if he got the investigation. He just wanted the announcement. He was trying to have a James Comey moment. He knows that when Comey announced that he was looking into Hillary Clinton's emails a month and a half or so before the election, or a month before the election, she lost 3 points in the polls overnight. And he's thinking that if Ukraine will simply announce that they're looking into Joe Biden being corrupt, that Joe Biden will lose 3 points and that he can win again by doing that. I mean, I think this is so evident, but spot on, Brian, for catching that. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back in just a moment, taking your calls in anticipation of the hearings. They should be probably starting in another 5 or 10 minutes. Hey, it's the opening day of our Free Speech TV Fund Drive. We really need you to call now and support Free Speech TV. Let's try to make this thing as short as possible, and kick off this day with a real punch. With a $1,000 gift, you can come to Portland and hang out in the studio for the last hour of our show, and then we'll go have lunch together and chat about whatever's on your mind. Sometimes people come and they want to share things that they've been doing with me, or books that they've written, or whatever. Other times they come and they have lots of questions, or sometimes they just want to come and see what it all looks like here. It's like, this is not a big fancy television station. It's a funky little homemade studio in an office building, and we do a lot with it. And it's kind of cool to come over and see it. And if you do come for the meet and greet, that $1,000 meet and greet, be sure to ask me to show you the back room, which is where all the electronics are. It's just so, it's geek paradise, which is me. I just love it. So anyhow, that's the $1,000 gift. With a $250 gift, you get the online class with Professor Thom. I don't normally refer to myself as professor, but it's a virtual meet and greet. It's an hour that we'll spend on a computer, on Zoom. You can just listen in, or you can also put your face on, and we can see each other. It's up to you. You will be able to see me and hear me, and I'll be able to answer any questions you have, and I'm there for you. That's with a $250 gift. With a $360 gift, I'm kind of jumping around here, we have Study Up with Professor Thom. It's a 3-book package, It's and all three of these books are new. They've all come out in this last year. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, and ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World. And if you know anybody who's challenged by or gifted with ADHD, I think you'll find it fascinating. It just came out, literally just in the last month or three. With a $120 gift, we've got the Never Again Is Now T-shirt, referencing, obviously, Mr. Trump. With a $50 gift, there's the Nobody is Above the Law tote bag. And with a $20 gift, Gravity, the only law Trump hasn't broken, bumper sticker. So that's a good one. That's a really good one. So anyhow, those are the premiums that we're offering. But I think more importantly is just your opportunity. This is your opportunity to support Free Speech TV. And Free Speech TV has worked it out now that sustaining gifts are really sustaining both for them and for our program and from you, which is just a wonderful thing. If you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, whatever it may be, sustaining memberships are really where it's at. Hopefully we can work out exactly what kind of gifts might be associated with what sustaining memberships, because these are all the one-time gifts. But sustaining memberships are really important because what they do is this is where you're committing to say yes every month, ding my credit card for a certain amount. And for most people who give on a sustaining membership basis, it's a small amount of money that basically is barely noticed. I mean, $5 a month or $10 a month, or for some people $20 a month, or even $100 or a few $100s a month, depending on their income, is that small amount that they just can have deducted from their credit card. But what it allows Free Speech TV to do is budget. It allows them to say, okay, we know that going into this next quarter or into this next year, we will have this amount of money at this time. And so they can plan. They can say, okay, we can, on October, we'll be able to add a new show. Or starting in November, we'll be able to do some new outreach and, maybe buy some ads or some billboards or something telling people about Free Speech TV. I would really love to see Free Speech TV doing some outreach. And it's the sustaining gifts that actually enable that. So whether you want to give a one-time gift and get one of these goodies here, or whether you want to give a sustaining gift and really be a good, solid, long-term partner with Free Speech TV, please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. Free Speech TV needs you. There is basically no real progressive television out there. I mean, MSNBC tries to pretend that they're progressive television. They're owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing organization, basically is started by a right-wing family out of Florida. And the station is littered with Republicans from one end to the other, and not to mention commercials. But Free Speech TV is it. So if you can't make a gift, or even if you can, but in particular, if you can't call now 877-378-8669 to make a gift, there is something you can do to help Free Speech TV. And that is get somebody else hooked on this show and on this network. Share it with a friend. Tell people about it on Facebook. Tell people about it on Twitter. Tell your people in your book club or your next door neighbor or at the PTA about Free Speech TV and how they can find it, how you find it, how you watch this show. And bring in other people who may be able to be donors. And let's expand the base of Free Speech TV. We really need your help now. 877-378-8669. Thanks so much. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 34 minutes past the hour, and we're still, the committee, we're waiting for the committee to reassemble. They've not even yet all come into the room. In fact, most of them have not yet come into the room. And also, I'm thinking about the debate last night. I continue to think we've got a great lineup of candidates, and it's going to be interesting to see over the polling over the next couple of days, who goes where and how. But So anyhow, let's continue our conversations here. Zoe in Encino, California. Hey, Zoe, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for your show and for all your wisdom that you share with us. I just want to say about last night, it was refreshing to see adults on the stage.
Yeah.
I just think it went really well. And I commend Rachel Maddow and the rest for doing such a great job. I also want to thank MSNBC. They made it free so I could watch it actually on my computer.
Oh, that's great.
I love your freespeech.org. I donate. I'm a contributor. And I loved what you just read about revolutionary love. I thought of two things. I thought of we need Mr. Rogers back in our world. And we also, and we also, I think of Carl Rogers, Dr. Carl Rogers, and person-centered therapy and how important his theories and concepts and his work has been. But I just want to mainly say thank you. I'm not going to worry about what's going on in Washington because I think the truth is coming out, and I really respect Adam Schiff and all of the people that are really looking to keep our democracy whole. And I think we're going to be just fine. So
I hope you're right,
Zoe. Wonderful day.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
keep
very much.
doing what you do.
I will do my very best. Thanks a lot, Zoe. It's great to hear from you. Rita in Chicago. Hey, Rita, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You there?
I am. And wasn't it refreshing to see adults on stage last night? Compare that with 4 years ago, the Republican primaries, where everybody was trash talking each other, and Marco Rubio was saying Donald Trump had tiny hands, and Trump was going out. I mean, it was what a difference,
The names were flying. Yeah. Hey, I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, and I have a question. This has been bugging me. I've been listening as much as I can to the testimonies. The other day when Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was speaking, I was riveted. I was listening. I'm listening to WCPT. When he went to the lawyers, is that not considered blowing the whistle, or am I missing something? I know where I work and where I've always worked. If you've got a legal department, we've always been told if you have any questions about anything, you can always talk to legal.
Right.
Why wasn't that like blowing the whistle?
Blowing the whistle is a very specific act that's covered by law, and where you're actually invoking protections by law, and you are asking that the information that you have be kicked up the chain of command. That's a different thing from going to the lawyers for the department that you work for and asking basically that something be memorialized, which I think is what Bolton was asking Fiona Hill to do. And asking Vindman to do was basically saying, we all need a record of this. And if Bolton's being quoted correctly, it seems like he didn't. If this whole drug deal went down, if this whole thing went south, if the word got out that they were trying to basically extort and bribe Ukraine and get them to trash talk Joe Biden, if that came out in a way that reflected on Trump and on all these guys, basically Bolton was saying, I don't want to be in the line of fire on this thing. So I think I think it was more like a defensive act, whereas being a whistleblower is a prospective. It's not defensive. It's moving forward. It's carrying information forward. So frankly, I think that's what's going on. Rita, thank you for the call. Dean in Corpus Christi, Texas. Hey, Dean, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I want to say thank you for your work.
Sure.
My biggest deal was I wanted to know who enforces the Constitution, and I wanted to know with the Third Amendment in
quartering soldiers in people's homes.
No, how we can get them to enforce the Third Amendment, and with getting rid of this poor representation of a president and him having secret private meetings with Russian leaders, Chinese leaders, North Korean leaders, and they only benefit him and his company,
right,
and not the people of the United States of America.
Yeah. With regard to the Third Amendment says that the U.S. Army cannot force you to put soldiers up in your spare bedroom, basically, which was something that's called quartering soldiers, and it's quartering troops, and it's something that was done by the British to the Americans leading up to the Revolutionary War, and one of the reasons why it's in the Constitution. But it's an anachronism. It's no longer, really applies to pretty much anything. But in terms of Trump doing his job as opposed to Trump looking out for his own interests, I am hopeful that one of the things that comes out of all this stuff, Dean, particularly these revelations of basically how genuinely corrupt Donald Trump is, how low he'll go, how deep he will stoop in order to feather his own nest or get reelected, and also how bizarre the Republicans will go on this. I mean, keep in mind. Lev Parnas, remember Igor and Lev, right? Lev Parnas, the guy who, these were the two guys who were arrested fleeing the country. They were arrested at Dulles Airport a couple weeks ago. They work with Rudy Giuliani. They're in tight with a bunch of Ukrainian oligarchs. This guy Lev was the one who took Devin Nunes on this. There's just an incredible story about it by Joan McCarter over at Daily Kos. The attorney for Lev Parnas is a guy named Ed McMahon, and I'm sorry, it wasn't Lev who took him; it was Ed McMahon. He helped Devin Nunes in his investigations in 2018, intended to undermine Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe into Russian election meddling, and that included a 4-day trip that Nunes and 3 of his aides took at the end of November of last year. And that 4-day trip, by the way, cost you and me $63,000. Joan McCarter goes on to say Parnas has been a busy guy on behalf of Trump. You'll remember he's the one, along with a colleague and other friend, Igor Fruman, who was given a secret James Bond mission from Trump at last year's White House Hanukkah party, designed to pressure Ukraine into an investigation of Joe Biden and his son Hunter. This seems to be where this entire thing was cooked up, was Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman and Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. The 4 of them got together and cooked this thing up. And then, Rudy was kind of shoving it down the throats of the State Department employees, of the embassies and whatnot. And Lev and Igor were, just out stirring the pot. And I think as more comes out, we're going to get how genuinely bizarre all of this is. John in Las Vegas. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. First, thank you so much for your show. It has really been a beacon for me over the years of information and just inspiration.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Here. Thank you. I wanted to mention about the hearings. I've been listening to them pretty much since the beginning, and something that seems to be missing with the arguments that I hear is that impeachment itself, it's not a punishment. It's not punitive. It's corrective. It's a way to ensure that a behavior is not repeated. A public official, regardless of office or height of office, is not allowed to gain a thing of value from his office. And smearing a political opponent is a thing of value.
Right.
It's something that we don't want to have repeated down the line.
So your point is what? Simply that impeachment is not a punishment. It's a way of excising a cancer, essentially.
Exactly. We want the behavior of self-dealing to not be repeated down the road.
Yeah.
Plus, this is the one thing that we're aware of. What else is going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of that may come out in years? I mean, you look at the things with Nixon's and some of the recordings that have come out. Just recently, they were released where he was talking with Reagan, and some of the comments that they made on that. It really. I worry more about what I don't know that's going on in the background. And policy-wise, of course, Trump is a nightmare. All the things that he's done since he's been in office.
Even the stuff right out in the open, yeah, with the EPA and everything else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, even with this impeachment thing, he goes on CNN and he asked China to get dirt on Joe Biden.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he's in a different reality. He doesn't even understand that what he's doing is illegal. It's wrong to do.
Yeah, and your point is well made, John, and I agree. I think that it is a corrective and an important one. Thank you for making that. Michael in Venice Beach, California. Michael, you say the hearings are hurting the Democrats, really?
Yeah, I mean, I try to consider myself a political junkie of sorts, and I try to watch these things as much as I can, but I just don't see the case being made not to liberal Democrats. They've already made up their minds, or Democrats in general. They already made up their mind. I mean, the inquiry didn't even get the full support of every Democrat in the House. You got the guy Van Drew in New Jersey didn't vote for it. The guy Colin Peterson up in Minnesota didn't vote for it. And if these things were voted on tomorrow, my guess is you wouldn't get a single Republican vote. I mean, this is not Howard Baker and Sam Ervin.
And if that's the case, this is a real tragedy, Michael. I mean, what we're looking at are explicit crimes that are worse than anything Richard Nixon ever did. Richard Nixon didn't try to corrupt an emerging democracy and an ally. He didn't try to corrupt an ally. He just ordered some mafioso guys to break into the headquarters of the Democratic Party to see if the Democrats had any evidence that he had corrupted the '68 peace talks with LBJ.
Well, look, in this situation, the Vice President of the United States didn't resign, and you didn't have a true constitutional crisis. And right now, the way
what are you talking about?
I'm talking about Spiro Agnew resigning.
That had
corruption charges.
Yeah, he resigned for his own corruption, not for Nixon's corruption.
It was part of Watergate.
No, it wasn't.
And yes, it was.
No, it wasn't. You had a prosecutor in New Jersey. It wasn't federal charges against Agnew. These were state charges in New Jersey, and the federal prosecutor in New Jersey went to the Supreme Court and said, can we go against the vice president? And the Supreme Court said, yes, you may prosecute this for the vice president. And so then they started to prosecute Agnew. Agnew resigned as part of a plea agreement and admitted his guilt, by the way, and went back to New Jersey and was barred from participating in politics thereafter. So then, Nixon puts Ford in, and then, the whole Watergate thing comes unraveled. I mean, it may be that Agnew left after the burglary was discovered. I don't remember the exact timeline, but there was, to the best of my knowledge, no relationship between Agnew and his corruption and Nixon and his corruption and his the impeachment hearings against him. But I also don't see what that has to do with right now. I just don't get it, Michael. And I see Michael hung up. Okay. So do you think that these hearings are hurting the Democrats more than the Republicans? I frankly think that the hearings should be helping America. I mean, that would be my goal, that it be helping our country and that it be helping the cause of peace around the world, that it be helping the cause of people being informed about what's going on around the world. And also that, people get it, how corrupt both Trump and the Republican Party are, frankly.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And I don't say that because, I'm hopeful that the Democrats can win electorally based on that. I would much rather have it be a debate on policy, on ideas. And welcome back. Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just wanted to make this point, and I've called and made it before, but Trump is absolutely a fake news president. He made that point when he used to be his own publicist. He made that point when he announced his presidency and had paid actors sitting around, but every network picked it up like it was a large volume event for him. And then now the whole point, he does not care about any action. He merely wants to go ahead and see more fake news on CNN proves he's a fake news president. He continues to make fake news that only benefits him. And the other part that's contradictory to me, why would you use CNN if you're always telling your people CNN is fake?
Right. Well, because he knows that CNN has a lot more credibility in the United States than Fox does. They're not viewed as a partisan tool. Generally, MSNBC is viewed as being more favorable to Democrats, Fox to Republicans. CNN tries to cut it down the middle. In fact, they've had this right-wing guy on CNN all morning arguing, we still haven't found anything wrong with Trump. They try to have, quote, both sides, which makes me crazy sometimes, and I just leave CNN as a result of it. But your point is well taken. And this goes back to a conversation that we had earlier I don't recall which caller it was, but somebody suggested that, Trump really is just a brand manager. And then I went off on this thing about how, Trump, Apple is basically selling a brand more than they are selling hardware or software. Nike doesn't make their own shoes. They're selling the brand, right? And like this factory in Texas that Trump went to yesterday to say, hey, I caused Apple to come back to America and build a factory. Well, no, the factory is, goes back to the Obama years. But my point is that Trump is just a brand manager. He doesn't care about what's actually in the package. He doesn't actually care about the product. And the product, of course, would be governance of the United States of America. He doesn't care about that at all. He cares about the brand. And right now, his brand is being tarnished, which is hurting his larger larger economic brand, frankly. Am I making sense? I think I'm agreeing with you, Jordan.
I agree. I 100% concur. Like, he has no general interest for anyone but himself, and he will create whatever type of turmoil is needed to deflect whatever else is going on and personally benefit himself. It's one of the most narcissistic people I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
so,
amen.
I appreciate your call and time, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. Zachary in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Hey, Zachary.
Hello. I just wanted to call in and say that Mike Pence's hometown of Columbus, Indiana, turned Democrat first time in 36 years.
Right, I remember that. Yep, that was that was a few weeks back, wasn't it? Maybe a month or so ago. There was a special election. Yeah, it's remarkable. I think that people are on to the game, Zachary. I think that they're figuring out that Trump and Pence are basically con men, have been on their entire lives. Pence, taking money from the tobacco industry, and back in 2000 writing op-eds about how tobacco doesn't cause cancer and isn't addictive, and Trump, doing all his grifts. I mean, it's fairly obvious what he's up to. And I think people are waking up. I really do. And I see that as a really good thing for our country. Not necessarily for the Democratic Party. I mean, or the Republican Party. It's frankly a tragedy for the Republican Party, and I think in some ways a tragedy for America. But sometimes, you lance the boil, as it were. It's 51 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls. They're coming back into the meeting room right now, so I'm guessing another 3 or 4 minutes. Stick around. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Members of, supporters of our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Well, one point that I think needs to be emphasized, and honestly, Tom, you're the only person that's mentioned it earlier this week, is that with regard to Hunter Biden, the Bidens and the corruption in Ukraine, and the Republicans obviously are acknowledging that because they have asked several witnesses questions. Last week, I think it was Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Jennifer Williams about, are you aware of the fact that Hunter Biden has received X amount of dollars from Burisma?
Right.
By the way, they are assuming facts that have not been established, at least within these hearings, so there's no reason the witnesses should know this. But the idea is that Donald Trump has at his disposal 17 intelligence and law enforcement agencies in America, and he has to go to Ukraine to get dirt on the Bidens. I mean, if there was something dirty on the Bidens, it ought to be available in American law and justice.
Right.
And
or the FBI should be able to find it, and Trump can order the FBI to do that. But the FBI is not going to manufacture evidence, and for that you need a corrupt third world country.
So you can't exactly. So you can't get it. He can't get a statement that the Bidens are under investigation from any American agency. So he has, and you're right. All he wants is a statement, because when you think about it, as the Republicans have tried to assert that Ukraine is so corrupt, what the hell good would an investigation from Ukraine be worth? Right. Nothing. All he wants is a statement that it's under investigation and therefore it's dirt. So they are acknowledging, while they're denying, that this is exactly what Trump did.
Exactly. And one of the most important pieces of Gordon Sondland's testimony yesterday was the fact that he believed, and he talked with Trump directly, so he would be in a position to know, he believed that Trump didn't care if the investigation itself ever happened. All he wanted was for the president of Ukraine to go on CNN and say, we are looking into the possibility that Hunter and Joe Biden are corrupt. We are launching a corruption. Go ahead.
Let me ask you, Tom, shouldn't, and this is regard to Ukraine policy, at this point, I would say the Congress ought to call President Zelensky and say, if you pull a Trump and say, if you want any more missiles from us, you better show up here and start accounting, because he might be a victim, but in this corruption with Trump. And I would say any more aid to Ukraine is going to be contingent on them, first of all, showing up to Congress to pick up the check and letting our Congress know when they've received it.
I don't think that would be appropriate, Paul. I mean, subpoenaing a head of state is real problematic. But so asking Zelensky to provide someone in his chain of command to Congress who is a firsthand witness to these corrupt requests, that would seem reasonable.
Okay.
But,
okay, I'm for that.
Because he has to maintain his status with his people. He has to maintain face, or however you'd say it. He's got to be able to do that. But go ahead.
If it's a drug deal, if it's the analogy of a drug deal is apropos for John Bolton, then you got two people involved. A drug deal involves two parties. And they're both not legal.
Right, a buyer and a seller, yeah. And that's where we're at. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. Spot on. And I think it's really worth emphasizing. And by the way, I'm pretty sure when we come back from this break that the committee hearings will have restarted. But I think it's really worth emphasizing that Sondland yesterday made a point on several occasions of saying that Trump didn't care if there was an actual investigation. Obviously, he didn't think that there was anything corrupt about Biden being on that board. He just wanted the announcement.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Hey, it's the opening day of our Free Speech TV Fund Drive. We really need you to call now and support Free Speech TV. Let's try to make this thing as short as possible, and kick off this day with a real punch. With a $1,000 gift, you can come to Portland and hang out in the studio for the last hour of our show, and then we'll go have lunch together and chat about whatever's on your mind. Sometimes people come and they want to share things that they've been doing with me, or books that they've written or whatever. Other times they come and they have lots of questions, or sometimes they just want to come and see what it all looks like here. It's like, we're This is not a big fancy television station. It's a funky little homemade studio in an office building. And we do a lot with it. And it's kind of cool to come over and see it. And if you do come for the meet and greet, that $1,000 meet and greet, be sure to ask me to show you the back room, which is where all the electronics are. It's just so, it's geek paradise, which is me. I just love it. So anyhow, that's the $1,000 gift. With a $250 gift, you get the online class with Professor Thom. I don't normally refer to myself as professor, but it's a virtual meet and greet. It's an hour that we'll spend on a computer on Zoom. You can just listen in, or you can also put your face on, and we can see each other. It's up to you. You will be able to see me and hear me, and I'll be able to answer any questions you have, and I'm there for you. That's with a $250 gift. With a $360 gift, I'm kind of jumping around here. We have Study Up with Professor Thom. It's a 3-book package. It's and all 3 of these books are new. They've all come out in this last year. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, and ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World. And if you know anybody who's challenged by or gifted with ADHD, I think you'll find it fascinating. It just came out, literally just in the last month or 3. With a $120 gift, we've got the Never Again Is Now T-shirt, referencing, obviously, Mr. Trump. With the $50 gift, there's the Nobody is Above the Law tote bag. And with a $20 gift, Gravity, the only law Trump hasn't broken, bumper sticker. So that's a good one. That's a really good one. So anyhow, those are the premiums that we're offering. But I think more importantly is just your opportunity. This is your opportunity to support Free Speech TV. And Free Speech TV has worked it out now that sustaining gifts are really sustaining both for them and for our program and from you, which is just a wonderful thing. If you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, whatever it may be, sustaining memberships are really where it's at. Hopefully we can work out exactly what kind of gifts might be associated with what sustaining memberships, because these are all the one-time gifts. But sustaining memberships are really important, because what they do is this is where you're committing to say yes every month, ding my credit card for a certain amount. And for most people who give on a sustaining membership basis, it's a small amount of money that basically is barely noticed. I mean, $5 a month or $10 a month, or for some people $20 a month, or even $100 or a few $100s a month, depending on their income, is that small amount that they just can have deducted from their credit card. But what it allows Free Speech TV to do is budget. It allows them to say, okay, we know that going into this next quarter or into this next year, we will have this amount of money at this time. And so they can plan. They can say, okay, we can, on October, we'll be able to add a new show. Or starting in November, we'll be able to do some new outreach and, maybe buy some ads or some billboards or something telling people about Free Speech TV. I would really love to see Free Speech TV doing some outreach. And it's the sustaining gifts that actually enable that. So whether you want to give a one-time gift and get one of these goodies here, or whether you want to give a sustaining gift and really be a good, solid, long-term partner with Free Speech TV, please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. Free Speech TV needs you. There is basically no real progressive television out there. I mean, MSNBC tries to pretend that they're progressive television. They're owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing organization, basically is started by a right-wing family out of Florida. And the station is littered with Republicans from one end to the other, and not to mention commercials. But Free Speech TV is it. So if you can't make a gift, or even if you can, but in particular, if you can't call now 877-378-8669 to make a gift, there is something you can do to help Free Speech TV. And that is get somebody else hooked on this show and on this network. Share it with a friend. Tell people about it on Facebook. Tell people about it on Twitter. Tell your people in your book club or your next door neighbor or at the PTA about Free Speech TV and how they can find it, how you find it, how you watch this show. And bring in other people who may be able to be donors. And let's expand the base of Free Speech TV. We really need your help now. 877-378-8669. Thanks so much. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam.
You stated in your deposition that a colleague had showed you the Steele dossier before it was published. Who was that colleague?
That was one of my colleagues at the Brookings Institution.
And who was that?
That was the Brookings Institution President Strobe Talbot, who had been sent a copy of this.
And he shared it with you?
That was the day before it was published in BuzzFeed.
You mentioned in your deposition also that you thought that it was let's get the exact quote, that the dossier was a rabbit hole. Is that still your testimony?
That's correct.
Do you know who paid Christopher Steele to generate the Steele dossiers? There were several of them.
At the time, I did not know. I understand from the media that it was through GPS Fusion. If that's not correct,
you know who was, and there was a law firm involved, but you know who the source of the money was?
I didn't at the time. No, I did not.
But do you know?
Well, now I've read it in reports, and thanks to your colleagues as well, that it was the DNC.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, Congress, the impeachment committee just reconvened, and Devin Nunes is trying to do his little conspiracy theory thing with Fiona Hill. He just kicked it off to the council, Mr. Castor. So here's the lawyer for the Republicans.
Thank you as well. You're a late entrant into this situation, and things sure did escalate quickly. We spoke with you last Friday night about what we thought was going to be a 30-second vignette about a 2-minute phone call, and it turns out you know, with your 40-minute opener today, you have a lot of information to share. So we appreciate you being here. Dr. Hill, your last day at the National Security Council was July 19th. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So you weren't involved with the July 25th call, and you weren't involved with any of the relevant activities related to the pause and the aid?
I was not. That's correct.
And as of July 19th, did you believe that a call was going to be scheduled for the 25th?
I personally did not believe that it was going to be scheduled that date, no.
And what was the thinking at the NSC as of July 19th about such a call?
Well, I've learned from other depositions, to be clear here, that perhaps there was some awareness that there might be a call. Ambassador Sondland, if you may recall, showed an exchange with the person who was taking over from my position, Tim Morrison, in which he indicated that there would be a call coming up. I was not aware of that.
Okay, were you in favor?
So there were differences, let's just say, obviously, in understanding about that call.
And were you in favor of such a call as of the 19th?
Actually, I was not, and I did say something about that in the opening part of the sessions today.
Okay, and how about Ambassador Bolton, to your knowledge?
Well, I know that Ambassador Sondland said in that email that Bolton was in agreement. To my knowledge, Bolton was not in agreement at that particular juncture, to my knowledge.
Do you know what his opposition was?
It was based on the fact that he didn't feel the call had been properly prepared, and as I said earlier, that we wanted to make sure that there was going to be a fulsome bilateral US-Ukraine agenda that was discussed, which is usual with these calls.
And were you surprised that a call ultimately was scheduled?
I was when I learned about it, that's right.
And did you have any communications with anyone back at your old staff about how that came to be?
I did not, no.
Okay. You did learn about the pause and the security assistance aid.
I learned about that on July 18th, so the day before I left, that's correct.
And there were several meetings about this, I believe you testified to?
I said that I knew there was going to be a meeting in that time frame, and there was one put onto the schedule for the following week. But of course, I had left.
This is, you know, the Republican lawyer, Mr. Castor, is trying to dig into this. But This is fascinating. Over on the New York Times, Katie Edmondson, a reporter there, is noting, during the break, Jim Jordan criticized Holmes's testimony for taking too long, considering that he only overheard a 2-minute call. Presumably, that would be on Fox News. I'm not sure where else. And then Trump retweeted that, and now we see this lawyer Castor is working Jim Jordan's comment and Trump's retweet into his opening questions. And then Katie Rogers notes Stephanie Grisham, the White House press secretary, just released a statement, quote, "As has been the case throughout the Democrats' impeachment sham, today's witnesses rely heavily on their own presumptions, assumptions, and opinions. These two witnesses, just like the rest, have no personal or direct knowledge regarding why U.S. aid was temporarily withheld." End of quote. Well, why don't you just tell us then, Stephanie Grisham or Donald Trump? Tell us why you withheld that aid. Anyhow, back to the hearing.
Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Sondland, they had become a little bit more involved with Ukraine policy?
Well, Ambassador Volker was always involved in Ukraine policy, at least since the beginning of his appointment as the special envoy for negotiations towards the war between Ukraine and Russia in Donbass.
What can you tell us about Ambassador Volker?
Ambassador Volker is an extraordinarily accomplished diplomat. I've worked with him in many capacities previously. You know his bio. He's been the ambassador to NATO.
Volker testified on Tuesday and is one of the three amigos.
At the State Department, and actually I know him personally. So, you know, in the truth that we're trying to get at it, who knows who and who's met. I know Ambassador Volker really well on a personal level as well.
Okay. And you said he's a man of integrity?
That's correct.
And always acted in the best interest of the United States?
Absolutely, yes.
When did you first learn of Ambassador Sondland's involvement?
Well, it came in different ways. Ambassador Sondland, as the ambassador to the EU, had some perfectly logical involvement in the Ukraine portfolio. We work very closely with the European Union on matters related to Ukraine. The Ukrainian dialogue with Russia was in a format known as the Minsk process, which was led by the French and the Germans, and Ambassador Volker was trying to find out ways in which he could work closely with the French and Germans to move along on the resolution of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And obviously the European Union, as the umbrella organization for Europe in terms of funding and assistance, was heavily active in offering financial assistance to the Ukrainian government as well as humanitarian assistance in the conflict. So it was perfectly logical that Ambassador Sondland would play some kind of role as our ambassador to the European Union.
Did you have any concerns when he presented himself to you as somebody with a major role?
I did at the time in which he presented it to me. This was after Ambassador Yovanovitch had been pushed out of her position. And it was at that juncture that Ambassador Sondland's role seemed to grow larger.
And did you express any concerns to him directly?
I did express concerns.
Katie Edmondson over at the New York Times is noting that in her closed-door testimony, Fiona Hill made it clear that she thought Sondland was out of his depth. Sondland apparently repeatedly gave out her personal cell phone number to officials from other countries who wanted a meeting with Bolton, her boss. It's pretty outside of protocol.
And he said that he was in charge of Ukraine. And I said, well, who put you in charge, Ambassador Sondland? And he said, the president.
Did that surprise you when he told you that?
It did surprise me. We'd had no directive. We hadn't been told this. Ambassador Bolton had never indicated in any way that he thought that Ambassador Sondland was playing a leading role in Ukraine.
Right. I believe you used the term a large remit, that he characterized he had been given a large remit from the president?
I can't remember what I said, remit, but it was portfolio. He was constantly, you know, these are all synonyms. He was talking to us about the fact that he'd been given a very broad portfolio by the president. He said his job was to go out and make deals in Europe. And as you know yourself, I listened to his testimony yesterday very carefully as well. He said that anything that had to do with the EU itself and the European Union member states was within his portfolio.
Right. We asked Ambassador Sondland about that at his deposition, and he conceded that he may have been spinning a little bit when he said that the president specifically gave him that role, and he indicated that his authority was coming at least a little bit more from the Secretary of State. At any point in time, was that related to you?
At different points, he mentioned talking directly to the Chief of Staff Mulvaney, and he also talked about Secretary Pompeo. But he was very, in fact, there were other people in the room in the meeting in which he asserted this to me.
I think one of the big questions right now is whether Pompeo is actively involved in this thing that Bolton called a drug deal. It's fairly clear that Mick Mulvaney was. He's the one who put the hold on the military assistance. That Donald Trump was. He's the one who ordered it and pushed these people into it. But, you know, the question of Pompeo's role, because Pompeo really, really wants to be the Republican senator from Kansas, and they're trying to recruit him in Kansas. And I think he's starting to feel a little burned here. Anyhow, back to Dr. Hill.
In which her reputation had been maligned repeatedly on television and in all kinds of exchanges. I felt that that was completely unnecessary. If the president wanted to remove an ambassador, which he did quite frequently, there was a number of ambassadors removed who were not political but career officials. That was done, but without these kinds of interventions. I wondered what that message was being sent. So there was that. And then on the second front, it was very clear at this point that there was, let's just say, a different channel in operation in relations to Ukraine, one that was domestic and political in nature, and that was very different from the channel or the loop, however you like it, that I and my colleagues were in, where we were focused on bilateral relations and U.S. foreign policy.
I think the main thing that the Castor, the lawyer for the Republicans, is trying to do right now with Fiona Hill is he's trying to impeach Sondland.
Did you have
so
any
keep an ear out for that.
With officials at the State Department about your concerns?
I did.
And who did you relate those concerns to?
I related those concerns directly to my counterpart, who was Acting Assistant Secretary Phil Rieker, who I know you've spoken to. I also spoke to
See, if they can marginalize Sondland, then the impact of his testimony becomes less.
I covered a broad portfolio myself, and we often would talk about individual items. And I had private discussions with Deputy Secretary Sullivan, and he, of course, has appeared before committees here in the course of his nomination to be ambassador to Russia and has spoken about that himself.
Okay. And you advocated to all those officials about your concerns about the information being spread about Ambassador Yovanovitch?
I did, that's correct.
She's speaking of the Republican smear campaign against the ambassador that we heard from on, what was it, Monday at 9 o'clock. We'll be right back.
Arming the Ukrainians with the javelins?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're listening to Republican Attorney Castor questioning Dr. Fiona Hill.
Institution in that juncture. Because I was very worried at that particular point in time that the Ukrainian military was not in a fit state to really take on board sophisticated weapons, be they defensive or offensive weapons. And I worried that there was not a long-term sustainable plan given the overwhelming force that the Russians could apply against the Ukrainians. However, when I came into government in 2017 and started to interact with all of my colleagues in the Pentagon, and you had Laura Cooper here yesterday, I realized, in fact, that there'd been an awful lot of work done on this and that there was a clear and consistent plan for the sustainability long-term of the Ukrainian military. So I changed my mind.
Okay. And you're in fact, one of the, I believe, the only witness that we've spoken to that has been able to articulate the opposition to providing the javelins. And as we understand it, during the Obama administration, the interagency consensus was, in fact, to provide the javelins, but they were not provided. Were you aware of the decision back then?
I was, and I think it was very much made on a political basis about concerns that this would provoke the Russians, depending on how this was presented. And we were very mindful of that also when there were the discussions internally about the lethal defensive weapons inside of the administration.
Mr. Holmes, you're on the ground in Kyiv, and the javelins have now been authorized, provided. What's the view from the field, the U.S. Embassy, as to the effectiveness of the javelins?
They're an important strategic deterrent. They're not actively employed in combat operations right now, but the mere idea that were the Russians to advance substantially using certain kinds of armor, that the Ukrainians would have this capability, deters them from doing so. It also thereby sends a very important symbolic message to the Ukrainian military that they have access to this high-end technology and that we trust them to do it. I would only add also that they've offered to buy some using their own funds. The initial tranche was provided through basically a program to do that, but they've now offered to spend their own money to buy more. So I think they think they're important.
And Ambassador Taylor has testified, Mr. Kent has testified that this is, in fact, the consensus of the interagency providing the javelins. Is it the, in your experience working with Ambassador Taylor, was he also very much an advocate for this?
Yes.
Mr. Holmes, I want to go back to name some Americans. Now I want to talk a little bit about Ukrainian government officials.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Sergei Leshchenko?
Yes.
Have you met with him?
I have.
He was a journalist, then he was in the parliament. Is he currently in the parliament?
Journalist again.
Journalist again. Are you aware that when he was in the parliament that he had provided information to a Fusion GPS operative named Nellie Orr?
I'm not aware of Nellie Orr. I'm not aware of who he provided information to. I'm aware that as a journalist, he's provided information.
Well, he was in the parliament at the time. This is in the 2016 campaign. He provided widely known as the Black Ledger. Have you ever heard of the Black Ledger?
I have.
And the Black Ledger, is that seen as credible information?
Yes.
The Black Ledger is credible?
Yes.
Bob Mueller did not find it credible. Do you dispute what Bob Mueller's findings were? They didn't use it in the prosecution or in the report?
I'm not aware that Bob Mueller did not find it credible. I think it was evidence in other criminal proceedings. Its credibility was not questioned in those proceedings, but I'm not an expert on that.
So the motivation for Leshchenko, as was reported to, was to go after a Trump campaign official and undermine Trump's candidacy. Are you aware of that?
If you mean by the release of the Black Ledger, I think Leshchenko's motivation.
Devin Nunes is trying to assert that the Black Ledger, this was the book that had all of had all these bribes that Poroshenko was paying to people, including to Paul Manafort, that was used to prosecute Paul Manafort for tax fraud, that was actually a fraud. And it's really interesting because David Holmes is saying, no, sorry, it was real. Here,
you're aware
this is Nunes interrogating Holmes.
You heard Dr. Hill's testimony, but the Steele dossier that contained that initial information that was fed in the FBI, were you aware that the Democrats had paid for that information?
That was given to the FBI by John McCain, by the way.
I'm not accusing of involvement. I'm just asking if you, not even if you knew at the time, but you now know today that the Democrats had paid for that information.
So I do want to be clear that all that happened before I arrived in Ukraine, so I don't have any firsthand.
Not accusing any involvement of you with the Steele dossier.
Understood, but I do want to be clear about that. And then in addition, I have read about those issues, but I'm not an expert on them.
But you're not disputing that the Democrats and the Clinton campaign were the source of funds that funded the Steele dossier?
I wouldn't be in a position to dispute that, sir.
Actually, it was originally paid for by the Republicans. I think it was Marco Rubio's campaign.
To run operatives in foreign countries to dig up dirt on their opponents?
No.
Dr. Hill, do you think it's appropriate for political parties to pay operatives to dig up dirt on their opponents?
I do not.
Mr. Castor. Turn to the President Zelensky's inauguration. Ambassador Volker testified that he was very pleased with the size of the delegation, although the vice president was unable to make the trip.
This is Castor, the lawyer for the Republicans.
Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Sondland. And I understand, Dr. Hill, you were involved with some of the logistics and putting the delegation together. What can you tell us about the vice president's role in attending or not attending?
Well, I know that you've had the testimony of Jennifer Williams from the Vice President's office, and I defer to her as being much closer to the decision-making about the Vice President's attendance. I will say that I and many others hoped that the Vice President would be able to attend. And what I know from my perspective, because I was not involved intimately in discussions with the Vice President or his immediate staff, was that there were some questions about the schedule. As you all know, the President and Vice President can not be out of the country at the same time. And there were some questions about presidential travel in the same time frame. There was quite a bit of back and forth as to whether it would be really feasible for the Vice President in that time frame to go. So that was what I was aware of. I wasn't aware to the extent of the discussions that obviously Ms. Williams was involved in.
Right. The president was traveling in Japan, and then he was headed to Europe for the D-Day anniversary. The vice president's office, according to Ms. Williams, provided 4 days, the end of May, the 29th, 30th, 31st, June 1st. And as it turned out, the Ukrainians decided, I believe it was on May 16th, to schedule the inauguration for.
I think he's trying to go to a, there's no here
by this point in time,
defense, but I'm not sure.
The vice president had been rerouted for a trip to Canada about the USMCA. And
in other words, I think he's trying to establish that it was a perfectly reasonable thing that both the president and the vice president didn't go to Ukraine for the inauguration of Zelensky.
Encouraged not to attend for any other reason, do you?
I personally do not, but again, I defer to Ms. Williams.
And Ms. Williams' testimony was that she heard from the chief of staff's assistant that the vice president was not able to go. The leap, the reason for that was related to any of these investigations hasn't been fully established.
See, he's saying, oh, this is just hearsay.
From the materials you provided for your deposition, there was a discussion whether President Orban may have influenced President Trump's decision on that May 13th day. And do you remember when the meeting was with President Orban?
I do.
When was that?
That was in May, that's correct.
But do you remember what time of day it was on the 13th?
To be honest, usually these meetings are around lunchtime, sometime in that time frame, in the kind of early to mid part of the day. Right. But I can't speak for sure, and I just want to be very clear that I cannot speak about head of state engagements.
Okay. Jennifer Williams testified that she learned about 11 or 11:15, and the meeting with President Orban was not scheduled until later in the afternoon. According to your schedule, it was right around 1:45. Is that consistent with your recollection?
What about the lunchtime?
A reporter who was also a CNN analyst, Karun Demirjian, is reporting Fiona Hill testified that Donald Trump thought that Kash Patel was in charge of Ukraine. This was her earlier testimony. But actually, it was Alexander Vindman who was in charge of Ukraine. But Trump thought that Kash Patel was, because Kash Patel was apparently delivering all the Ukraine information straight to Trump. Now, what's interesting is that Kash Patel used to be a Nunes staffer. He used to work for Devin Nunes. It's getting really, really weird. We're listening to the testimony of Fiona Hill and former NSC Senior Director for Europe and Russia, and David Holmes, who worked out of the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Right now, they're being interrogated by the lawyer, the counsel for the Republicans, Mr. Castor. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the hearings in just a moment.
Is an extraordinarily good advocate of U.S. interests, particularly in the energy sphere, and one of Ukraine's Achilles' heel, in addition to its military disadvantage.
Hey, it's the opening day of our Free Speech TV Fund Drive. We really need you to call now and support Free Speech TV. Let's try to make this thing as short as possible, and kick off this day with a real punch. With a $1,000 gift, you can come to Portland and hang out in the studio for the last hour of our show, and then we'll go have lunch together and chat about whatever's on your mind. Sometimes people come and they want to share things that they've been doing with me, or books that they've written or whatever. Other times they come and they have lots of questions, or sometimes they just want to come and see what it all looks like here. It's like, we're This is not a big fancy television station. It's a funky little homemade studio in an office building. And we do a lot with it. And it's kind of cool to come over and see it. And if you do come for the meet and greet, that $1,000 meet and greet, be sure to ask me to show you the back room, which is where all the electronics are. It's just so, it's geek paradise, which is me. I just love it. So anyhow, that's the $1,000 gift. With a $250 gift, you get the online class with Professor Thom. I don't normally refer to myself as professor, but it's a virtual meet and greet. It's an hour that we'll spend on a computer on Zoom. You can just listen in, or you can also put your face on, and we can see each other. It's up to you. You will be able to see me and hear me, and I'll be able to answer any questions you have, and I'm there for you. That's with a $250 gift. With a $360 gift, I'm kind of jumping around here. We have Study Up with Professor Thom. It's a 3-book package. It's and all 3 of these books are new. They've all come out in this last year. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, and ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World. And if you know anybody who's challenged by or gifted with ADHD, I think you'll find it fascinating. It just came out literally just in the last month or 3. With a $120 gift, we've got the Never Again Is Now t-shirt, referencing obviously Mr. Trump. With the $50 gift, there's the Nobody is Above the Law tote bag. And with a $20 gift, Gravity, the only law Trump hasn't broken, bumper sticker. So that's a good one. That's a really good one. So anyhow, those are the premiums that we're offering. But I think more importantly is just your opportunity. This is your opportunity to support Free Speech TV. And Free Speech TV has worked it out now that sustaining gifts are really sustaining both for them and for our program and from you, which is just a wonderful thing. If you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, whatever it may be, sustaining memberships are really where it's at. Hopefully we can work out exactly what kind of gifts might be associated with what sustaining memberships, because these are all the one-time gifts. But sustaining memberships are really important, because what they do is this is where you're committing to say yes every month, ding my credit card for a certain amount. And for most people who give on a sustaining membership basis, it's a small amount of money that basically is barely noticed. I mean, $5 a month or $10 a month, or for some people $20 a month, or even $100 or a few $100s a month, depending on their income, is that small amount that they just can have deducted from their credit card. But what it allows Free Speech TV to do is budget. It allows them to say, okay, we know that going into this next quarter or into this next year, we will have this amount of money at this time. And so they can plan. They can say, okay, we can, on October, we'll be able to add a new show. Or starting in November, we'll be able to do some new outreach and, maybe buy some ads or some billboards or something telling people about Free Speech TV. I would really love to see Free Speech TV doing some outreach. And it's the sustaining gifts that actually enable that. So whether you want to give a one-time gift and get one of these goodies here, or whether you want to give a sustaining gift and really be a good, solid, long-term partner with Free Speech TV, please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. Free Speech TV needs you. There is basically no real progressive television out there. I mean, MSNBC tries to pretend that they're progressive television. They're owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing organization, basically is started by a right-wing family out of Florida. And the station is littered with Republicans from one end to the other, and not to mention commercials. But Free Speech TV is it. So if you can't make a gift, or even if you can, but in particular, if you can't call now 877-378-8669 and make a gift, there is something you can do to help Free Speech TV. And that is get somebody else hooked on this show and on this network. Share it with a friend. Tell people about it on Facebook. Tell people about it on Twitter. Tell your people in your book club or your next door neighbor or at the PTA about Free Speech TV and how they can find it, how you find it, how you watch this show. And bring in other people who may be able to be donors. And let's expand the base of Free Speech TV. We really need your help now. 877-378-8669. Thanks so much.
Give you an opportunity. He testified about some sort of coffee he had with you on your last day, and I think.
We're back with the Republican counsel, Mr. Castor, who is questioning Dr. Hill. Devin Nunes a minute ago had gone through this whole list of, do you know this person? Do you know that person? Do you know this conspiracy theory? Did you know that Joe Biden called the prosecutor? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. They're trying to lay out their narrative for Fox News. Anyhow, here's the Fiona Hill talking to the lawyer.
We ran into each other, or rather, he found out I was going to be there, and then asked me to meet him for coffee in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in 2018 in August. So this is a full year before I left. That was a very nice coffee, so perhaps he, conflated those two meetings together. The meeting that he was referring to, he had come in to meet with our director for the European Union. This was in my last week in the office. And as I was in the office at the same time for a brief period before going into another meeting, and it was my last week in the office, we agreed to sit down with the director of the European Union, with actually Colonel Vindman, and the assistant that Ambassador Sondland had brought with him from the State Department. So there were actually 4 of us in that meeting, and unfortunately it wasn't over coffee.
And, he went on to indicate that you were upset, and you were upset with
Ambassador. There were 5
Ambassador.
of us really in the meeting. Obviously I can't do math, sorry.
Fair enough. He indicated you were upset, and you were upset with Ambassador Bolton and upset with the way things are going, and I believe your counsel said that was an outright fabrication.
Well, I think you might recall in my deposition on October 14th that I said that very unfortunately I had a bit of a blow-up with Ambassador Sondland, and I had a couple of testy encounters with him.
I think he's still trying to reduce the credibility of Sondland's testimony.
We put you in charge of Ukraine, and I'll admit I was a bit rude, and that's when he told me the president would shut me up. And this other meeting, it was about 15, 20 minutes, exactly as he depicted it was. I was actually, to be honest, angry with him. And, I hate to say it, but often when women show anger, it's not fully appreciated. It's often, pushed onto emotional issues, perhaps, or deflected onto other people. And what I was angry about was that he wasn't coordinating with us. Now, I actually realised, having listened to his deposition, that he was absolutely right, that he wasn't coordinating with us because we weren't doing the same thing that he was doing. So I was upset with him that he wasn't fully telling us about all of the meetings that he was having. And he said to me, but I'm briefing the president, I'm briefing Chief of Staff Mulvaney, I'm briefing Secretary Pompeo, and I've talked to Ambassador Bolton. Who else do I have to deal with? And the point is we have a robust interagency process that deals with Ukraine. It includes Mr. Holmes, it includes Ambassador Taylor as the chargé in Ukraine, it includes a whole load of other people. But it struck me yesterday when you put up on the screen Ambassador Sondland's emails and who was on these emails, and he said, these are the people who need to know, that he was absolutely right, because he was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged. So he was correct, and I had not put my finger on that at the moment, but I was irritated with him and angry with him that he wasn't fully coordinating.
Amazing.
And
Instead
I
of
did say to him,
hurting
Sondland's
testimony, she's helping his
going
testimony.
to blow up, and here we are. And after I left to my next meeting, our director for the European Union talked to him much further for a full half hour or more later, trying to ask him about how we could coordinate better, or how others could coordinate better after I had left the office. And his feeling was that the National Security Council was always trying to block him. What we were trying to do was block us from straying into domestic or personal politics. And that was precisely what I was trying to do. But Ambassador Sondland is not wrong that he had been given a different remit than we had been. And it was at that moment that I started to realize how those things had diverged. And I realized, in fact, that I wasn't really being fair to Ambassador Sondland because he was carrying out what he thought he had been instructed to carry out, and we were doing something that we thought was just as, or perhaps even more important, but it wasn't in the same channel.
Right, Sondland was there to smear Joe Biden, and she was there to try to look out for the integrity of the United States and Ukraine. Here's Devin Nunes.
The President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, was concerned about the 2016 elections in Burisma. He had his personal attorney working these issues because he was under investigation by Robert Mueller's special counsel, partly beginning with an investigation that started with the Steele dossier that we've already established that the Democrats had paid for.
Actually, it started with George Papadopoulos.
FBI.
Nunes is lying.
So,
and it was fed to the FBI, and the Steele dossier was given to the
FBI
by John McCain at the request of Lindsey Graham.
Ukraine sounds like you had just earlier testified that you weren't aware of that. But if that was the concern of the president, to try to get to the bottom of it, and it's the concern of Ambassador Sondland, who was trying to set up meetings on behalf of, to ensure really that meetings occurred and phone calls occurred to strengthen the relationship. I understand the people at the NSC, people at the State Department had issues with that, but at the end of the day, isn't it the Commander-in-Chief that makes those decisions?
My point, Mr. Nunes, is that we at the National Security Council were not told, either by the President directly or through Ambassador Bolton, that we were to be focused on these issues as a matter of U.S. foreign policy toward Ukraine. So when you're talking about Ukraine in 2016, I never personally heard the President say anything specific about 2016 in Ukraine. I've seen him saying plenty of things publicly, but I was not given a directive. In fact, I was given a directive on July 10th by Ambassador Bolton very clearly to stay out of domestic politics.
Just for sake of the timeline,
blew up Devin
I think
Nunes.
as of July 19th,
now we're back to the lawyer.
They hadn't even engaged with Rudy Giuliani yet. I don't believe that happened until a little bit later. So you believe by July 19th they were already engaged in those types of activities?
We had already had a discussion with Kurt Volker, which was in the deep possessions of his assistant, Chris Anderson, that indicated that he had met with Rudy Giuliani at this point. And Ambassador Sondland made comments about meeting with Giuliani. And as we know, in the May 23rd meeting, they had been instructed to meet with Giuliani. Right. They gave us every impression that they were meeting with Rudy Giuliani at this point, and Rudy Giuliani was also saying on the television, and indeed has said subsequently, that he was closely coordinating with the State Department. So it was my belief that they were meeting with him.
Okay. And there's some, there's some ambiguity in the direction to work with Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, no, that's ambiguous.
Ambassador Volker said the president dismissed Ukraine and said, oh, if you want to work on it, just go talk to Rudy. And Ambassador Sondland took that a little bit differently. And I believe that Ambassador Volker...
Oh, so the new line of attack here, they're trying to throw Sondland under the bus. And he's saying, Trump was just saying, just talk to Rudy. No, they're there.
Subsequently from
She's not buying
Ambassador Volker's deposition. So I just want to tell you, in that particular time frame, I was not aware of that. And in fact, Gordon Sondland did refer to Rudy Giuliani. And again, Ambassador Bolton had warned Ambassador Volker not to meet with Rudy Giuliani in a meeting.
Mr. Morrison told us both in his
So this was all going on in early July, before Trump's call with Zelensky.
I did not relate any concerns in general terms about Colonel Vindman's judgment, so I was somewhat surprised when I heard Mr. Morrison make that assertion and when I read his deposition. There was a very specific point that was made, and again, these are personnel issues, and I'm sure that nobody here would like to have their private personnel issues put before a committee, but you've asked me about this. So I had a couple of very short transition meetings with Mr. Morrison. And again, Mr. Morrison did not work in our directorate. He was taking over the position, which he held for 3 months. I had worked on the
Morrison is the one that Devin Nunes tried to get
Europe
to trash talk
at the time for more than 2 years at this point, and I'd been working for a year with Colonel Vindman, with Mr. Vindman.
Mr. Vindman.
And in the course of one of the meetings, sometime in the June timeframe, I sat down with Mr. Morrison and with a deputy, he referred to him in his deposition, John Erith, who was also working, and we went through our organizational chart. We went through who was staying, who was rotating out and leaving in the summer, and we talked about everybody's strengths and weaknesses. And I always asked my staff to do upward feedback as well, to talk about what I wasn't doing right either. I'd like to learn too. And I said that I was concerned about the way things were trending in Ukraine policy. So Colonel Vindman is a highly distinguished, decorated military officer. He came over to us from the chairman's office and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we were evaluating and looking at him in the context of what his future positions would be in the context of the US Army. And I was concerned that if, for example, Colonel Vindman might decide to leave the military, that perhaps he wasn't as well suited for something that would be much more political. I did not feel that he had the political antenna to deal with something that was straying into domestic politics. Not everyone is suited for that. That does not mean in any way that I was questioning his overall judgment, nor was I questioning in any way his substantive expertise. He is excellent on issues related to Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, on Russian defense issues. He had been in charge of the Russia campaign, thinking through at the chairman's office
just
and in the
destroying
Pentagon.
the Republicans
This
right
was
now.
a very specific issue, because by June, we saw that things were diverging, and you needed completely different sensitivity. Some people in my office have worked at the highest levels of advisory positions, and Mr. Morrison had come from Capitol Hill. He knew politics inside out, and we said that Colonel Vindman did not, and we were concerned about how he would manage what was becoming a highly charged and potentially partisan issue, which had not been before.
And Colonel Vindman related to us during his deposition that he subsequently was sort of cut out of a lot of the decision-making and involvements with the embassy in Ukraine. Was that something you recommended?
Not with the embassy in Ukraine. I mean, we did pull him back from the meeting in May in the Oval Office. And subsequently, we were very concerned about these political aspects to this, and we did not feel.
See, he keeps trying to get her to say, basically, he tried earlier to get her to say Sunderland was, full of
highly political
BS, and now he's trying to get her to say that Vindman is, because these are the two witnesses who both basically laid out this conspiracy between Trump and Giuliani, and apparently Volker and Sunderland to get the president of Ukraine to trash talk Joe Biden, just to help Donald Trump in 2020.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And she is having no part of it, and she is saying, no, Vindman was a great guy, and Morrison took my comments out of context.
I believe it was Senator Johnson who had said that the president was concerned about burden sharing, perhaps others as well. And so trying to interpret why this might have happened, we were looking into the facts of what the Europeans have provided and what we have provided. It's very illuminating what we learned. The United States has provided combined civilian and military assistance to Ukraine since 2014 of about $3 billion, plus two $1 billion, three $1 billion loan guarantees. Those get paid back largely. So just over $3 billion. The Europeans, at the level of the European Union plus the member states combined since 2014, my understanding, have provided a combined $12 billion to Ukraine.
And you were able to communicate that information back at the end of August?
I believe so. Yeah, this was done in collaboration with other missions to the EU, to NATO, and others. Yes.
And do you think that was the information the White House was looking for?
We don't know. If the concern was that that others weren't spending as much as we were to support Ukraine, then that information showed a different story.
Okay. And the aid was subsequently lifted. The pause in the aid was lifted shortly thereafter.
It was in early September, in mid-September.
Yield back.
That concludes the 45-minute rounds. We'll now go to member questioning. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. First, as a threshold matter, I want to say to the witnesses to be a bit cautious when members represent. Are you aware of this fact? Are you aware of that fact? Do you know that so-and-so testified to this or testified to that? If you have personal knowledge of it, that's fine. I'm not saying this is deliberate. Sometimes members get it wrong. So let me just clear the record on one of the things that was suggested to you that the Vice President canceled his trip because of a conflict with the trip to Canada. That was not Ms. Williams' testimony. Her testimony was, I asked my colleague why we should stop trip planning and why the Vice President would not be attending, and I was informed that the President had decided the Vice President would not attend the inauguration. So just offer that caution. Dr. Hill, I want to ask you, you may be aware of some of the attacks on Colonel Vindman, suggesting that he has a dual loyalty, that he's not really loyal to America, he's loyal to Ukraine. I wanted to ask you, as a fellow immigrant, what you think of those kind of accusations when they're leveled against Colonel Vindman or other Americans.
I think it's very unfortunate. I mean, this is a country of immigrants, with the exception, perhaps of very few people still here. Everyone immigrated to the United States at some point in their family history. And this is what, for me, really does make America great. I mean, I'm sure that every single person here, some people perhaps came reluctantly, others came by choice, as I did. But this is, for me, this is the essence of America. It's why I wanted to be here and why I wanted to stay here. And I think it's unfair to castigate anyone. Everyone has some kind of appellate to them. I'm an Anglo-American, perhaps, then, or I'm a British American, I'm a naturalized citizen. I do not believe that my loyalty is to the United Kingdom. My loyalty is here to the United States. This is my country and the country that I serve. And I know for a fact that every single one of my colleagues, and there were many naturalized citizens in my office and across the National Security Council, felt exactly the same way. I think it's deeply unfair.
Thank you. You mentioned something in your testimony, I might not have this exactly right, that I think Ambassador Sondland at one point told you his role was to make deals. Is that right?
That's correct.
I want to ask
told
you
other people that as well, to be clear.
I want to ask you about one of those deals, the one that Ambassador Bolton described as a drug deal. I had the suggestion, or the indication rather, when Mr. Goldman was asking questions about the July 10th meeting, and in fact there were two meetings, one Ambassador Bolton's presence and then another in the wardroom, that there was more you had to say about that. Do you want to walk us through that in a little more detail?
Well,
in our special video for our...
There's been some concern about the sequencing here and discrepancies between various depositions. So what happened immediately after the meeting that Ambassador Bolton caught a little short was that he told me to hold back in the room. And he was escorting out the Ukrainian visitors, along with Secretary Perry and Ambassadors Volker and Sondland. And I guess they wanted to take a quick photograph outside of his office. And I know that Secretary Perry and others have tweeted out that photograph, beautiful sunny day, and there's a picture of all of them standing just outside of Ambassador Bolton's office. This was very quick. He came back in. And at that point, I guess they were already moving down to the wardroom, because on the way out of Ambassador Bolton's office, Ambassador Sondland had said, let's regroup in the wardroom for, a quick huddle on next steps, which, to be honest, was quite unusual. You don't usually huddle in a room in the White House to discuss next steps with foreign
And we're back. Fiona Hill
is
being questioned now by Adam
which already,
Schiff.
as I'd said, Ambassador Bolton wasn't prepared to do. And when Ambassador Bolton came back into the office, that's when he gave me the very strong instruction to go downstairs, find out what was being discussed, and to come right back up and report it to him. And as I came into the wardroom, Alex Vindman, Colonel Vindman, and Ambassador Sondland were in an exchange, and that's when I noticed that Colonel Vindman looked quite alarmed. Now, I know that Ambassador Sondland was asked yesterday, because again I watched all of his testimony, and I watched it very carefully, that there were some questions about yelling and shouting. I certainly never said that, and there was no yelling and shouting. That's some embellishment that's crept in, perhaps in media depictions, or how people like to retell these stories and add things to them. When I came in, Ambassador Sondland was in an exchange with Colonel Vindman along the lines of, well, we have an agreement to have this meeting. And I came in and I asked, what's going on here? And he said, and this is again, the Ukrainians are there, Ambassador Volker was there, but at this point, I also want to stress, Secretary Perry had left. He was not in the wardroom when I came. As I was coming in, Secretary Perry and his colleagues were leaving. So Secretary Perry has no recollection of this meeting because he was not in it. And so when I came in, Gordon Sondland was basically saying, well, look, we have a deal here that there will be a meeting. I have a deal here with Chief of Staff Mulvaney. There will be a meeting if the Ukrainians open up or announce these investigations into 2016 in Burisma. And I cut it off immediately there. Because by this point, having heard Mr. Giuliani over and over again on the television and all of the issues that he was asserting, by this point it was clear that Burisma was code for the Bidens, because Giuliani was laying it out there. I could see why Colonel Vindman was alarmed, and he said, this is inappropriate, we're the National Security Council, we can't be involved in this. And I've learned, since from Mr. Holmes's rendition here today, that Colonel Vindman had already warned the Ukrainians, or in fact President Zelensky, no less, to stay out of American politics, domestic politics. So I cut off this line and I said to Ambassador Sondland, look, we need procedures for here. Ambassador Bolton just made it clear we can't set up the meeting right now. We have to properly prepare this through the proper process. I know this sounds all very boring, but we have national security procedures to do this. And I said, we really shouldn't be litigating this or talking about this in front of our colleagues from Ukraine. It was completely inappropriate for us to be thrashing this out in front of them. And he agreed, and we asked our Ukrainian colleagues to move into the corridor outside the wardroom. And I explained where this is in the deposition, which was also extraordinarily awkward, because they shouldn't have been standing around in a corridor in the, basically in the West Wing at this particular juncture. And that's when I pushed back on Ambassador Sondland and said, look, I know there's differences about when we should have this meeting. We're trying to figure out whether we should have it after the Ukrainian parliamentary elections, the Rada elections, which by that point I think had been set for July 21st. It must have been, because this is July 10th at this point. And Ambassador Bolton would like to wait until after that to basically see whether President Zelensky gets a majority in the parliament, which would enable him to form a cabinet, and then we can move forward. And Ambassador Sondland then said, okay, fair enough. He realized he wasn't going to be able to push this further. Ambassador Volker didn't say anything at this particular juncture. And then he said he had another meeting, and they all left. And I went back up and relayed this to Ambassador Bolton, which is when he gave me the very specific instruction that we've already been through, to go to talk to Mr. Eisenberg, John Eisenberg, in the NSC
talk to the lawyer.
Office.
Thank you. Mr. Nunes.
I assume we're getting 8 minutes there.
So now let's see what conspiracy theory he can spin.
Don't cut off a witness in the middle of their answer. You may proceed.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Holmes, why didn't your boss talk about it?
What's that, sir?
Why didn't your boss bring up the call that you overheard? The reason you're here today. I mean, you're their closing witness, yet their star witness, their first witness, Ambassador Taylor, didn't even bring it up. And when we deposed you, you said this was extremely distinctive experience, one of the most remarkable events of my life. You described it like this. You said, after the call happens, I immediately told Deputy Chief of Mission and others at the embassy about the call. Then you said you went on vacation. You told several friends and family about the call. Then you come back on August 6th and you tell Ambassador Taylor about the call.
This is Gymnasium Jordan, by the way.
And then in your deposition statement, you said in your statement today as well, I repeatedly referred to the call in meetings and conversations where the issue of the president's interest in Ukraine was relevant. I repeatedly referred to the call in meetings and conversations where the issue of the president's interest in Ukraine was relevant. That sounds like government speak for you told everybody.
So he's trying to take down the witness.
Their star witness, their first witness, Ambassador Taylor, when he came here, he related 13 different conversations he had between July 18th when the aid is frozen, September 11th when it's released. 13 different conversations, never once mentioning this call. July 19th, Dr. Hill, Colonel Vindman told Taylor what Sondland told them.
This is like,
July 19th, Sondland.
Hang on just a second.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Told Dan, look, July 28th, Morrison tells Taylor what happened on the Trump-Zelensky call. August 16th,
I'm Casey Haas.
Volker tells Taylor what Yarmak told Volker.
Hey, it's the opening day of our Free Speech TV Fund Drive. We really need you to call now and support Free Speech TV. Let's try to make this thing as short as possible, and kick off this day with a real punch. With a $1,000 gift, You can come to Portland and hang out in the studio for the last hour of our show, and then we'll go have lunch together and chat about whatever's on your mind. Sometimes people come and they want to share things that they've been doing with me or books that they've written or whatever. Other times they come and they have lots of questions, or sometimes they just want to come and see what it all looks like here. It's like, this is not a big fancy television station. It's a funky little homemade studio in an office building. And we do a lot with it. And it's kind of cool to come over and see it. And if you do come for the meet and greet, that $1,000 meet and greet, be sure to ask me to show you the back room, which is where all the electronics are. It's just so, it's geek paradise, which is me. I just love it. So anyhow, that's the $1,000 gift. With a $250 gift, you get the online class with Professor Thom. I don't normally refer to myself as professor, but it's a virtual meet and greet. It's an hour that we'll spend on a computer on Zoom. You can just listen in, or you can also put your face on, and we can see each other. It's up to you. You will be able to see me and hear me, and I'll be able to answer any questions you have, and I'm there for you. That's with a $250 gift. With a $360 gift, I'm kind of jumping around here. We have Study Up with Professor Thom. It's a 3-book package. It's and all 3 of these books are new. They've all come out in this last year. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, and ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World. And if you know anybody who's challenged by or gifted with ADHD, I think you'll find it fascinating. It just came out literally just in the last month or 3. With a $120 gift, we've got the Never Again Is Now T-shirt, referencing obviously Mr. Trump. With a $50 gift, there's the Nobody Is Above the Law tote bag. And with a $20 gift, Gravity, the only law Trump hasn't broken, bumper sticker. So that's a good one. That's a really good one. So anyhow, those are the premiums that we're offering. But I think more importantly is just your opportunity. This is your opportunity to support Free Speech TV. And Free Speech TV has worked it out now that sustaining gifts are really sustaining both for them and for our program and from you, which is just a wonderful thing. If you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, whatever it may be, sustaining memberships are really where it's at. Hopefully we can work out exactly what kind of gifts might be associated with what sustaining memberships, because these are all the one-time gifts. But sustaining memberships are really important, because what they do is this is where you're committing to say yes every month, ding my credit card for a certain amount. And for, most people who give on a sustaining membership basis, it's a small amount of money that basically is barely noticed. I mean, $5 a month or $10 a month, or for some people $20 a month, or even $100 or a few $100s a month, depending on their income, is, that small amount that they just can, have deducted from their credit card. But what it allows Free Speech TV to do is budget. It allows them to say, okay, we know that going into this next quarter or into this next year, we will have this amount of money at this time. And so they can plan. They can say, okay, we can, on October, we'll be able to add a new show. Or starting in November, we'll be able to do some new outreach and, maybe buy some ads or some billboards or something telling people about Free Speech TV. I would really love to see Free Speech TV doing some outreach. And it's the sustaining gifts that actually enable that. So whether you want to give a one-time gift and get one of these goodies here, or whether you want to give a sustaining gift and really be a good, solid, long-term partner with Free Speech TV, please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. Free Speech TV needs you. There is basically no real progressive television out there. I mean, MSNBC tries to pretend that they're progressive television. They're owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing organization, basically is started by a right-wing family out of Florida. And the station is littered with Republicans from one end to the other, and not to mention commercials. But Free Speech TV is it. So if you can't make a gift, or even if you can, but in particular, if you can't call now 877-378-8669 to make a gift, there is something you can do to help Free Speech TV. And that is get somebody else hooked on this show and on this network. You know, share it with a friend. Tell people about it on Facebook. Tell people about it on Twitter. Tell your people in your book club or your next door neighbor or at the PTA about Free Speech TV and how they can find it, how you find it, how you watch this show. And bring in other people who may be able to be donors. And let's expand the base of Free Speech TV. We really need your help now. 877-378-8669. Thanks so much.
Ranking Member Nunes does not speak of the Russia hoax. And this is an area in which context is pretty important. Dr. Hill, let me read you a comment by another senior official. Why did Democratic National Committee turn down the DHS offer to protect against hacks? It's all a big Dem hoax, all caps. Why did the DNC refuse to turn over its server to the FBI? It's all a big Dem scam. Dr. Hill, do you know who said those things?
I don't.
That's the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. So you might be forgiven for your...
that.
Yeah, you didn't miss much. But my point is, and tell me if you agree or disagree, ambiguity, a failure to name and shame the Russians for the attack in 2016, that is not in the service of our national security, is it?
It's not, no.
It's not. So let's turn to Ukraine. Dr. Hill, have you seen you characterized the idea that Ukraine interfered in the election as a fictional narrative. Have you seen any evidence at all that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election?
Well, I brought with me two exhibits that I was pointed to, in fact, by our colleagues during the deposition that I gave on October 14th. And actually, I'm quite grateful that they pointed me in this direction. I was presented during my deposition with two articles, or at least two pieces of information. One was an op-ed that the Ukrainian ambassador, Charlie, wrote in 2016 in The Hill. So this is during the presidential campaign when President Trump was then the nominee for the Republican Party. And this is Ambassador Charlie, who was then, still the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, being critical of President Trump, who was then the nominee for the Republican Party, for making comments about Ukraine, Crimea, and Russia.
May I interrupt you there? Let me be very specific about what those comments were. The president.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So Democrat Jim Himes is questioning Dr. Hill right now. This is about basically Trump and his love of conspiracy theories.
Right.
Something that you or somebody else might have said, and then you proceed to say what you want to say.
Right. So here
this
it
is.
is.
What Ambassador Charlie does is he talks about Ukraine's position vis-a-vis Russia and Russian aggression against Ukraine.
Yeah, and let me just read, because it's worth people hearing what this severe attack on candidate Trump, who has suggested that the Crimeans would rather be with Russia. Ambassador Charlie writes, even if Trump's comments are only speculative and do not really reflect a future foreign policy, they call for appeasement of an aggressor and support the violation of a sovereign country's territorial integrity and another's breach of international law. Dun, dun, dun. That's the attack on candidate Trump. Does that sound like election interference to you?
Well, I would say that it's probably not the most advisable thing to do for an ambassador, because you never know who's going to win. And I think that the second piece that was presented to me at great length, and I want to thank Mr. Castor for making me go back and read it again, because when you asked me the questions about it, I did remember the piece. Kenneth Vogel is a very well-known and, as you've pointed out, extremely good journalist. And I'd remembered reading this back in the day in January of 2017, but it had been a long time between then and October. And you gave me a copy, and I went back and read it again, because I think it actually is extraordinarily important. It gets to this issue here. Mr. Vogel points out that the Ukrainian government, again, they wouldn't have done very well at the bookies, picking up the issue I pointed out at the beginning of today. They bet on the wrong horse. They bet on Hillary Clinton winning the election. And so, you know, they were trying to curry favor with the Clinton campaign. It's quite evident here. And he relates, you know, to some extent, individuals and some Ukrainian officials, like Mr. Avakov, the Interior Minister, and a number of other people that he names here and that have been named at various points, and talks about how they were trying to collect information, as Ranking Member Nunes said, on Mr. Manafort and on other people as well. However, I do want to point out that the crux of the article here by Mr. Vogel is he said there was little evidence of a top-down effort by Ukraine. And he makes a distinction between the Russian effort that was personally directed by Russian President Putin and involved the country's military and foreign intelligence services. Now, I don't think that those two things are exactly the same. I also mentioned in my deposition of October 14th that, in fact, many officials from many countries, including Ukraine, bet on the wrong horse. They believed that Secretary Clinton, former Senator Clinton, former First Lady Clinton was going to win. And many said some pretty disparaging and hurtful things about President Trump, and I can't blame him for feeling aggrieved about them. And when we were setting up head of state visits, and I remember I have a portfolio of 50-plus countries, plus NATO and the European Union, we thought it prudent to collect as much as possible about comments that people might have said about the president during the campaign when he was either one of the candidates to be the nominee for the Republican Party, or when he was actually the candidate running against Hillary Clinton. And I'm sorry to say that an awful lot, and perhaps I shouldn't name them here because it will have consequences, an awful lot of senior officials in many governments, including our allied governments, said some pretty hurtful things about the president. And I would also personally take offense at some of the things that were said if I were the president. Now, the difference here, however, is that that hasn't had any major impact on his feelings towards those countries. Not that I have seen. But I've also heard the president say, and he said it in
other
public,
words,
so I'm not
politicians all over the world trash talked
privilege
Trump when he was a candidate, but the only country that he's punishing for trash talking him right now is Ukraine.
Ukrainian officials, Ambassador Charlie's been removed as being the ambassador from here, made some pretty, unpleasant statements about, or some ill-advised op-eds. But I could list a whole host of ambassadors from allied countries who tweeted out, who had public comments about the president as well, and it did not affect security assistance, having meetings with them. If it would, there'd been a lot of people he wouldn't have met with.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to add to the record a Politico article of December 1st, 2016, entitled "Russia Accuses Ukraine of Sabotaging Trump." It outlines Russian senior officials making allegations that there was Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election.
Without objection. Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to Ms. Ratcliffe, 5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to pick up where
now
my
we're back to Mr.
colleague
Ratcliffe,
across
the
aisle,
Republican.
Congressman Himes, left off earlier. Respectfully, Dr. Hill, he was not defending you. He was defending himself and Democrats. I want to make sure the record's very clear. Ranking Member Nunes was correct. He correctly noted in his opening that Republicans, not Democrats on this committee, were the first ones to raise the issue of Russian interference in the 2016 election. The disagreement wasn't about Russian meddling. The disagreement was about whether or not President Trump conspired with Russia, a false allegation peddled by the Democrats generally and specifically by some Democrats on this committee. With that, Mr. Holmes, I want to turn to you and the part of the conversation, your testimony where you said you heard President Trump say, is he going to do the investigation? And Ambassador Sondland said he's going to do it. He'll do anything you ask him to. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
What did President Trump say next?
He said, good, what about Sweden?
He said what?
Sir, sorry, I need to look at back where we are in the middle of the conversation here. Where are we from the testimony? Exactly. So then they turned to the Sweden conversation.
Again, he's trying to get Holmes
What did President Trump say next?
He said, good, what about Sweden?
Good, what about Sweden? Good, what about Sweden? Why isn't that in the in your statement?
Because the statement wasn't about a rapper. It was
Not a
about
word for word, every single word in the conversation.
But it's the most important part of the conversation.
Well, then they turned to Sweden. They turned to the other topic.
Respectfully, Mr. Holmes, this impeachment inquiry is based on the call the day before where President Trump, as part of a bribery scheme, as part of an extortion scheme, as part of a quid pro quo, according to the Democrats, demanded investigations in exchange for either military aid or a White House meeting. And the next day, you were witness to President Trump receiving word that the bribery scheme was successful, the extortion scheme was successful. And his response, was good. What about Sweden?
Yes, sir. The Ukraine portion of that conversation was extremely brief.
What was the first thing the president said
You
on
mean
the
he
call?
didn't rub his hands together and cackle, we have them now? I mean, this is just an absurd line
This
of
was
questioning.
you had a clear recollection of
Yes,
this
sir.
conversation.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Radcliffe, please allow Mr. Holmes to answer.
Yes, sir. Sondland greeted the president.
How?
He said, he said, hello, Mr. President, I'm in Ukraine, I'm in Kyiv. And the president said, are you in Ukraine?
You think he said, I think you're in Ukraine? He said what?
He said, are you in Kyiv, Ukraine?
What did you hear President Trump say about ASAP Rocky?
I did not hear President Trump's side of the conversation about ASAP Rocky.
You said, how did we go from the conversation was very loud and his voice was recognizable to, as you say here, when the conversation shifted, I could only hear Ambassador Sondland's side of the conversation.
Yes, sir. As I've testified, the initial part of the call, Ambassador Sondland, sort of when the president came on the call, he sort of winced and held the phone away from his ear for the initial portion of the call. And then at some point in the call, he stopped doing that. And I don't know why. I don't know if he turned the volume down. I don't know if the president spoke more quietly. I don't know if he got used to the volume. I don't know what changed.
What did change? It's important. This was memorable.
I don't know, sir. It was Ambassador Sondland stopped moving the phone away from his ear. That's
what it was?
Yes.
Okay.
Radcliffe is having a little bit of a challenge here.
How did the conversation end?
Trying to blow up this conversation.
I only heard Ambassador Sondland's side of the conversation, sir. And at the end of the conversation, he was giving the president advice on how to deal with this ASAP Rocky situation. And he said, they should have released him on your word, and you can tell the Kardashians you tried.
Okay. So to be clear, when President Trump received word that President Zelensky had agreed to the investigations, he said, good. What about Sweden?
Yes.
Okay. When exactly did Gordon Sondland ask President Zelensky about the investigations?
I'm sorry, sir?
When did he ask about the investigations?
When did Gordon Sondland ask Zelensky about the investigations?
Yeah.
You asked in which meeting did he raise the investigations?
Well, it was raised the day before on a call, and the next day, Gordon Sondland said the answer to that was he's going to do the investigation. So when did he ask about the investigations?
My assumption is he did it in the closed-door meeting with Yermak.
Well, I don't want to...
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I appreciate that, but I want to make sure the record's clear that yesterday Ambassador Sondland testified that the topic of conversations did not come up on that day. I yield
Time
back.
of the gentleman has expired. Ms. Sewell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for being here today. I'd like to turn our discussion to the campaign to remove.
This is Terry Sewell, the Democrat of Alabama.
Ambassador Yovanovitch. Both of you, in your various capacities, had to work with her, and both of you witnessed what I would call a smear campaign. I wanted to know your thoughts, Dr. Hill. What was your view of Ambassador Yovanovitch's experience and quality of her work in the Ukraine, and do you consider it to be a smear campaign?
I have the highest regard for Ambassador Yovanovitch, both in terms of her integrity and the high standards of work that she was carrying out as ambassador in Ukraine and across her whole career. I do believe that there was a smear campaign, and I just want to say, again, for the record, that I think it was unnecessary. If there was a decision to have a political ambassador put in place in Ukraine, that would be perfectly acceptable. It's exactly the right of the president to be able to do that. I just did not see why it was necessary to malign Ambassador Yovanovitch to such an extent.
Mr. Holmes, would you agree with that? And can you talk about the character, integrity, and performance of Ambassador Yovanovitch?
It's the House impeachment. This is actually the House Intelligence Committee serving as the impeachment committee.
In Ukraine by Ukrainians, I think also by visiting.
Ms. Sewell of Alabama is, Representative Sewell is questioning Mr. Holmes. We'll continue with this in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Basically, what's happening right now is that the Republicans are trying to impeach or to discredit the previous witnesses like Sondland and Vindman, and it's not working.
It was a very confusing time. As I've said before, President has the right to remove an ambassador for any or no reason at all. It was not clear to us why this was happening or why people weren't standing up for her.
I'd like to now turn, Dr. Hill, to your boss. Your boss was Ambassador Bolton, right?
That's correct, yes.
Did your boss, Ambassador Bolton, tell you that Giuliani was, quote, a hand grenade?
He did, yes.
What do you think he meant by his characterization of Giuliani as a hand grenade?
What he meant by this was pretty clear to me in the context of all of the statements that Mr. Giuliani was making publicly, that the investigations that he was promoting, that the storyline he was promoting, the narrative he was promoting was going to backfire. I think it has backfired.
Was that narrative also inclusive of falsehoods about Ambassador Yovanovitch?
At the particular juncture that Ambassador Bolton made that comment, absolutely, because that was in the context of my discussions with him about what was happening to Ambassador Yovanovitch.
I was particularly struck by your testimony, Dr. Hill, about receiving hateful calls and being accused of being a Soros mole in the White House. Are you a never-Trumper, or have you been true to your profession and remain nonpartisan?
I honestly don't know what the definition of a never-Trumper is, as I think many of my colleagues are feeling the same way, that it's a puzzling term to be applied to career or non-partisan officials. And I chose to come into the administration. I could easily have said no when I was approached
yes,
by the
but you
people who
didn't sign up to have hateful calls and the like.
I guess, unfortunately, where we are today in America, that's coming with the territory. They're continuing, honestly. I mean, we're constantly having to block Twitter posts of my name and address, and on the internet. We've been doing this over the last couple of days.
I think that
and as I said in my deposition, this could happen to any single person in this room, be it members of the press, be it members of Congress, and be it the staff. And I think we have to find ways of combating this. And again, this gets back, sadly, to things that our adversaries can also exploit.
Exactly. I think you would agree with me that this shouldn't become the new normal. Would you agree?
It should not.
I also think that this kind of behavior, instead of keeping you down, would make you undeterred. Are you more determined to continue to do your work and to do it professionally?
I am, and I think that all my colleagues are as well, because just as you said, we can't let this stand, and I don't think anyone here wants to let this stand. I actually don't believe that this is a partisan issue. I don't think anybody wants to come under personal attack.
Yeah, I unfortunately think that this has become the new norm, and we're being led by the very top of the food chain, which is our president, which is unfortunate. I'm especially disheartened by his treatment of women, and I think that the fact of the matter is that there's a long line of strong, talented women who have been smeared and victimized by this president, and we can either choose to ignore it or do something about it. And frankly, I think that whether you voted for him or whether you supported him or not, that doing so is wrong. You could simply just remove someone. You don't have to smear them. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Mr. Turner.
Right, I just want to echo that sentiment and certainly lament the attacks that have been levied against our colleague Lee Stefanik on this panel, which have been vile and hateful. For those of you keeping score at home, the effort to accuse our president of coercion, extortion, or bribery with these witnesses as we now come to the closing session of this basically break down as follows. We have Kent and Ambassador Taylor, who spoke of hearsay. Their hearsay of these matters that they said that they had heard were all statements that they'd heard from others who have also testified in front of us. So there's no one that's missing. There's no one out there. Kent and Taylor basically said that they'd heard it from Morrison and Sondland. Morrison indicated he'd heard it from
So PG&E. So this is
it costs $1
we're
million
listening
a mile.
to the hearing here, and this is Representative Turner, the Republican, who is trying to
indicated he had
trash talk
contact with
Fiona
no
Hill.
one on the planet. Volker testified that he did have direct contact both with the Ukrainians and with the President of the United States, and indicated that the President of the United States did not condition either a phone call, a meeting, or aid upon Ukraine undertaking investigations, and also testified that the Ukrainians did not believe that either. We also have the direct statements from the President of Ukraine and the Foreign Minister that they did not feel any pressure to undertake investigations. And we also have the evidence that we're all very much aware of, which is they did not undertake any investigations. We also have Yovanovitch and Dr. Hill.
Basically, what he's doing is he's
Yovanovitch obviously
recapping for Fox News the Republican talking points. This is the new Republican
Hill,
narrative.
you have provided me probably the greatest piece of evidence that's before us to illustrate the problem with hearsay. So you said, based on questions and statements, I have heard some of you on this committee, that'd be us, appear to believe that Russia and its security services did not conduct a campaign against our country. And perhaps somehow, for some reason, it was Ukraine. So this is, it was held up by Devin Nunes, is the report on Russian active measures that was voted on by all of us. It begins with this sentence. In 2015, Russia began engaging in a covert influence campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Every one of us, a little small, effort on your part, Dr. Hill, and you would have known that what you just said was not true, what you had heard, but you felt the need to put it in your 8-page statement before you went on to tell us a bunch of other things that you heard about other people, no matter how convinced you were of, also which were not necessarily true. One of which was that you said that Ambassador Sondland met with Giuliani. Actually, Ambassador Sondland testified here that he had not, as ambassador, met with Giuliani. He'd briefly met him in his lifetime by shaking his hand. And Giuliani issued a statement that they had never met either. This is the problem with no matter how convinced we are, Dr. Hill, no matter how much we believe we know that what we've heard is true, it is still just what we've heard. But so far in this hearing, in these series of hearings, the only thing that we have is Volker saying, I spoke to the president and I've spoke to the Ukrainians, neither of which believed that aid was conditioned, neither of which believed that the president was requiring it. And Ambassador Sondland, which said no one on the planet told him that that was the case. That's the sole evidence. Now, I got to tell you, the one thing that's interesting is Ambassador Sondland did say it's his belief that a meeting with the president was conditioned upon investigations. Ambassador Volker, who I think is a man of very significant integrity, said that that was not the case. Now, even if Ambassador Sondland is correct, that somebody, and Dr. Hill, you testified, and again, it's hearsay, you don't know, that supposedly Mulvaney told him that, because he didn't testify to that. But let's say somebody beside the president told him that. You guys want to be the laughingstock of history to impeach a president of the United States because he didn't take a meeting? Oh, please, dear God. Please undertake that. Now, Mr. Holmes, I got to tell you, you
Sir,
say that you're
is
there.
there a question for Dr. Hill?
Mr. Holmes, in your testimony, you said that Sondland said he loves your ass, and also said he'll do anything that you want. Mr. Holmes, that information had nothing whatsoever to do with the subject matter of any of these hearings. It was anecdotal, it was extraneous. Your statements that your interests are protecting Ukraine are
So
very
this is
dubious.
the
and you
ongoing Republican
embarrassed
attempt
President
to
Zelensky by making
impeach
those
is the
statements
correct
you
word,
didn't
but
have
in
to
this
make.
context
Who cares
it's
that
confusing.
Ambassador Sondland said that?
To trash
And you know,
talk
you didn't embarrass
the
Ambassador Sondland, you
witnesses
embarrassed Zelensky,
who are
because you
concerned
know he got
about
asked
Trump
this question
running
in his own
this
country, and people are
private op
hearing that statement as if it's
to
true.
smear Biden
And it's
will be done.
totally dubious if you didn't.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're in the segment now where they're going back and forth, 5 minutes for a Democrat, 5 minutes for a Republican, back and forth. It'll probably continue for another 30 minutes.
Sondland were both involved with a letter President Trump sent to the Ukrainian president
on May 29th, congratulating him.
Hey, it's the opening day of our Free Speech TV Fund Drive. We really need you to call now and support Free Speech TV. Let's try to make this thing as short as possible, and kick off this day with a real punch. With a $1,000 gift, you can come to Portland and hang out in the studio for the last hour of our show, and then we'll go have lunch together and chat about whatever's on your mind. Sometimes people come and they want to share things that they've been doing with me or books that they've written or whatever. Other times they come and they have lots of questions, or sometimes they just want to come and see what it all looks like here. It's like, this is not a big fancy television station. It's a funky little homemade studio in an office building. And we do a lot with it. And it's kind of cool to come over and see it. And if you do come for the meet and greet, that $1,000 meet and greet, be sure to ask me to show you the back room, which is where all the electronics are. It's just so, it's geek paradise, which is me. I just love it. So anyhow, that's the $1,000 gift. With a $250 gift, you get the online class with Professor Thom. I don't normally refer to myself as professor, but it's a virtual meet and greet. It's an hour that we'll spend on a computer on Zoom. You can just listen in, or you can also put your face on and we can see each other. It's up to you. You will be able to see me and hear me, and I'll be able to answer any questions you have, and, I'm there for you. That's with a $250 gift. With a $360 gift, I'm kind of jumping around here, we have Study Up with Professor Thom. It's a 3-book package. It's and all 3 of these books are new. They've all come out in this last year. The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, and ADHD, Hunter and a Farmer's World. And if you know anybody who's challenged by or gifted with ADHD, I think you'll find it fascinating. It just came out, literally just in the last month or 3. With a $120 gift, we've got the Never Again Is Now t-shirt, referencing, obviously, Mr. Trump. With the $50 gift, there's the Nobody is Above the Law tote bag. And with a $20 gift, Gravity, the only law Trump hasn't broken, bumper sticker. So that's a good one. That's a really good one. So anyhow, those are the premiums that we're offering. But I think more importantly is just your opportunity. This is your opportunity to support Free Speech TV. And Free Speech TV has worked it out now that sustaining gifts are really sustaining both for them and for our program and from you, which is just a wonderful thing. If you can give $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, whatever it may be, sustaining memberships are really where it's at. Hopefully we can work out exactly what kind of gifts might be associated with what sustaining memberships, because these are all the one-time gifts. But sustaining memberships are really important, because what they do is this is where you're committing to say yes every month, ding my credit card for a certain amount. And for, most people who give on a sustaining membership basis, it's a small amount of money that basically is barely noticed. I mean, $5 a month or $10 a month, or for some people $20 a month, or even $100 or a few $100s a month, depending on their income, is that small amount that they just can have deducted from their credit card. But what it allows Free Speech TV to do is budget. It allows them to say, okay, we know that going into this next quarter or into this next year, we will have this amount of money at this time. And so they can plan. They can say, okay, we can, on October, we'll be able to add a new show. Or starting in November, we'll be able to do some new outreach and, maybe buy some ads or some billboards or something telling people about Free Speech TV. I would really love to see Free Speech TV doing some outreach. And it's the sustaining gifts that actually enable that. So whether you want to give a one-time gift and get one of these goodies here, or whether you want to give a sustaining gift and really be a good, solid, long-term partner with Free Speech TV, please call now. 877-378-8669 is the telephone number. Free Speech TV needs you. There is basically no real progressive television out there. I mean, MSNBC tries to pretend that they're progressive television. They're owned by Comcast, which is a right-wing organization, basically is started by a right-wing family out of Florida. And the station is littered with Republicans from one end to the other, and not to mention commercials. But Free Speech TV is it. So if you can't make a gift, or even if you can, but in particular, if you can't call now 877-378-8669 to make a gift, there is something you can do to help Free Speech TV. And that is get somebody else hooked on this show and on this network. Share it with a friend. Tell people about it on Facebook. Tell people about it on Twitter. Tell your people in your book club or your next door neighbor or at the PTA about Free Speech TV and how they can find it, how you find it, how you watch this show. And bring in other people who may be able to be donors. And let's expand the base of Free Speech TV. We really need your help now. 877-378-8669. Thanks so much.
On their political rival? Was it good for America to claim having evidence of the president colluding with Russians when he did not? Costing...
The new strategy of the Republicans is to give long speeches filled with accusations, innuendo, and half-truths, and then not allow the person who they're seemingly questioning to respond, because, when these people respond, it doesn't work out well for the Republicans. This is Brad Winstrom,
Congress has, and apparently
Republican.
even with very partisan rules. But I'm curious. This impeachment inquiry was announced by the Speaker before the whistleblower complaint was even out. I'm curious why the lawyer for the whistleblower announced that the coup to impeach the president, that he announced that right after Trump won. That's pretty damning. I know it hurts after losing an election, especially as Americans, we usually get over it. And I imagine it would hurt even more if you were promised a position in the next administration and lost, and your hopes and your dreams are dashed. I've seen hatred for political reasons, specifically on June 14th, 2017 at a ball field in Virginia. And I've seen hatred in war. And I know that hatred blinds people. I've been in war and I've studied war. And coups create division. And it's time for this phase of the publicly announced and proclaimed Democrat coup to end. Thank you for your service. Thanks for being here. And I yield back.
Could I actually say something? Because we've had three...
Doctor, I was going to ask you if you'd like to respond. There have been a number... Gentleman suspended. Dr. Hill, you may respond.
No, I think that what Dr. Wenstrup said was very powerful about the importance of overcoming
the attacks on her. And you underscored again today that all ambassadors serve at the pleasure of the president. And certainly in the case of Ambassador Yovanovitch, he could have just asked her to come home. But that didn't happen. In fact, there was a systematic...
Dr. Hill, Ms. Holmes, thank you for being here. I actually have no questions for you that haven't already been asked. Russian collusion. We've gone from quid pro quo to bribery to extortion, 7 weeks of hearings, 16 secret closed-door sessions, 12 public hearings now, of which you are the last, hundreds of hours of testimony. And I really think that for those who hate the president, they haven't changed their minds. But there's a lot of Americans who look at this and they think, is that it, really? You're going to impeach and remove a president for this? Now, like I said, if you don't like the president, you've already come to that conclusion. Many people wanted this 3 years ago.
This is just the speechifying,
for a lot of Americans, they really
as
look
a
at that.
replacement
They
for
can
asking
see
questions.
this. No evidence.
At least he had the good manners to say, I'm just going to speechify here. I'm not interested in what you have to say.
Zero evidence firsthand of any quid pro quo. And yet, impeachment is almost inevitable. And why? Because the leadership of this committee has been unfair and dishonest. And I know we hear these crocodile tears from some of my colleagues who are heartbroken because they finally have to impeach this president. And we know that's absurd. There's no heartbroken. There's no prayerful tears over this. They're giddy over this. And there's not a person in the country who doesn't know that. Everyone knows what they're going to do next. They're going to impeach the president and they're going to send it on to the Senate. But that is the good news. That's good news. You know, we've all been to a concert. You got the warm-up band and then you got the main act. And what we've seen here is the warm-up band. This is kind of like the Sioux City Crooners. This is a band that no one's ever heard of. But the warm-up band is over, and now we're going to go on to the main event, and that's in the U.S. Senate. And in the U.S. Senate, there won't be any secret testimony. There's not going to be dishonest leadership or a chairman who refuses to let us ask appropriate questions or to deny a defense. Where in the world, where in the country do you have a trial where the prosecution presents their case and the defense
Adam
isn't
Schiff
able
into
to?
saying or doing something that'll hurt him.
So we'll finally be able to get to the truth. So I'm talking now to my colleagues in the Senate. These are some of the witnesses that you need to call, and these are some of the questions that you need to ask. First, you have to hear from the whistleblower. Now, they can choose to do that in closed session if they want to. I leave that up to them. But you can't initiate an impeachment of the President of the United States and not have to answer some questions. Who did he get his information from? Did he have the classification and the clearances to get that information? What's his relationship with Vice President Biden? Who has he shared that information with, including some members of the committee here? I think our own chairman needs to be called. What interactions did he or his staff have with the whistleblower? Did they help to coordinate or in any way facilitate the complaint?
You know,
did they coordinate?
The whistleblower is the guy who pulled the fire alarm.
What about Hunter Biden?
We already know now that there's a fire.
How did he get his job?
But what they're trying to say is, don't you even think about being a whistleblower. They're saying that to everybody else in the government.
Look, if he goes
don't
there
even think about it because we will hunt you
I
down.
don't care. But I want to know, did he have officials with or conversations with government officials, and was government policy changed at a particularly high level because of some of those? Devin Archer, former board member from Brisbane. Alexandria Chalupa, former DNC official who admitted she provided anti-Trump information to the DNC and to Hillary Clinton. Nellie Orr from Fusion GPS, who helped to create the ridiculous Steele dossier. I'd like to remind us what I said yesterday. The American people expect a lot in politics. They understand the tussle, the fight, the debate.
This is
but they also
Republican
expect
Chris Stewart.
basic fairness. And these proceedings have been anything but fair. The Senate has an opportunity to fix that.
Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll see if this is actually the last of the hearings or not, and if it's going to go to the Senate right away or not. So stick around.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here. Dr. Hill, when we last left July 10th, I believe Ambassador Bolton said to you, you go and tell Dr. Eisenberg that I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up on this, and you go tell him what you heard and what I've said. That's correct, is that right?
That's correct, sir, yes.
And John Eisenberg, he's the chief lawyer for the National Security Council, correct?
He is, yes.
And you went to see him?
I did go to see him.
And what did you say to him that day?
I basically gave him the same summary that I've given to you on the 10th of July.
Of what took place?
Of what took place, correct. Including some of the details that I shared with you as well, the sequencing and what transpired as I was walking in.
Now, did you have one or two meetings with him about that?
He did not have a great deal of time on the 10th, and I gave him the quick summary, and we agreed that we would meet again on the 11th, on July 11th, the next day. And I also wanted to bring in with me my colleague, Wells Griffith, our Senior Director for Energy, who'd been sitting with me on the sofa for the first portion of the meeting. And I also suggested that he speak to Colonel Vindman separately as well, because Colonel Vindman was in the wardroom when I arrived and had obviously been engaged in some discussion before I got there, because as I got into the room, they were clearly in the course of, sorry, with the microphone, clearly in the course of conversation. And I thought it was important for John Eisenberg to hear from Colonel Vindman himself what his recollections of the meeting were.
Did you raise the concerns that Ambassador Bolton had raised to you, to Mr. Eisenberg?
I certainly did. The first thing I related to him was exactly and precisely what Ambassador Bolton had asked me to.
In the course of those two meetings, what was Mr. Eisenberg's response?
Mr. Eisenberg took it all very seriously. He said, for example, that Colonel Vindman should feel free, he said this to me, in future to go and bring any concerns to him about these meetings. Similarly, myself and any others, if there was any subsequent follow-up in terms of these issues being raised again with any of the parties in the future.
He didn't say anything in response about how he took that meeting, how he would describe it, or if he had any, did he raise any concerns about what you told him that took place?
No, he did not. He listened very carefully to all of the information that we imparted.
Now, back to that July 10th meeting, the second meeting that's in the wardroom, correct?
That's correct.
Now, who's in that meeting besides yourself, the two Ukrainians?
Mr. Danilyuk and Mr. Yermak's aide, Ambassador Volker, Ambassador Sondland, and then a couple of people who I think were from the State Department. I wondered for a while if one of Secretary Perry's group had been there too. But I honestly cannot remember.
But Ambassador Volker was there during that entire
He was there, but he didn't actually speak very much during that meeting. And I heard his deposition, and I read his deposition where he didn't really recall that encounter. Again, he didn't really speak. Ambassador Sondland was doing most of the speaking.
Yeah, and I think you described it as you came in, Ambassador Sondland was talking about how he had an agreement with Chief of Staff Mulvaney for a meeting with the Ukrainians if they were going forward with the investigations. While this was taking place and afterwards, how were the Ukrainians reacting to what was being said?
Well, at the time, Mr. Yermak was quite impassive. I said that he had an aide with him, and his aide was sitting next to him in the original meeting with Ambassador Bolton and was, you know, from time to time, actually was on this side, whispering to him. So I wasn't sure myself, because I had not met Mr. Yermak before, about how good his English was. So I wasn't sure, perhaps Mr. Holmes might be able to reflect on that, as to whether he was, you know, having some points of clarification from the aide.
He understood what was happening.
Yeah, so I wasn't entirely sure if he was following all of the back and forth. Mr. Danilyuk, who I know very well and speaks very good English, looked quite alarmed. I think he was more alarmed at the fact that there was this back and forth between Ambassador Sondland and Colonel Vindman, then with me, about the meeting. Clearly, they very much wanted to have this meeting, and here are some US officials arguing about the meeting in front of him, and that was obviously very uncomfortable for him.
Did you have any follow-up to that, sir?
Just to add that Danilyuk speaks perfect English, and Yermak can get by in meetings, but often does ask for clarifications.
Given the time, I would yield back.
Ms. Stefanik.
Before I turn to our witnesses, I just wanted to say to my Democratic colleagues, not a single Republican member of this committee has said that Russia did not meddle in the 2016 elections. As the ranking member stated, we published a report focused on Russian active measures in 2016 with policy recommendations as to how we strengthen our cyber resiliency and election security to counter Russia. I myself have worked with members of this very committee on this issue, but also on the House Armed Services Committee. So to have our Democratic colleagues say these untruthful statements just reeks of political desperation in their continued obsession to manipulate mainstream media coverage. But the good news is the American people understand that this has been a partisan process from the start. The Democratic coordination with the whistleblower, the incessant and astounding leaks, the unprecedented closed-door process,
She's the Republican
close
from
to the
New York.
majority of members, close to the press, close to the people, starting this inquiry without taking a vote. And then when finally forced to take a vote, the vote was with bipartisan opposition.
Elise Stefanik here, by the way, has Tedrick Cobb challenging her, the Democrat Tedrick Cobb, in the election coming up in 12 months. Tedrick Cobb, TEDRACOBB.com, if you want to know about Stefanik's
Dr. Hill, you
opponent.
testified that you handed over your duties on the NSC to Tim Morrison on July 15th and that you physically left the White House on July 19th, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So that means that by the time there was the July 25th call with President Trump and President Zelensky, you were no longer on the NSC, correct?
Actually, I was still technically on the payroll of the NSC until the end of August 30th of 2019. But I was not physically in the building, and I'd handed over my duties to Mr. Morrison.
And you were not on the call?
I was not on the call. That is absolutely correct.
And it's also correct that you did not participate in the preparation of talking points or the specific coordination of setting up the call?
Not for that call, but let me just say for the record that there had been a long anticipation that eventually there would be a call. So there was a call package that was prepared in advance. I just cannot say how much of that call package that had perhaps been prepared since, for example, the inauguration of President Zelensky was then used as the basic material for that call. So I did take part in the preparation of that standard call package, but I did not take part in any preparation for the specific call on July 25th.
And the first time you actually read the transcript of the call was when it was released to the public.
That's correct.
Mr. Holmes, I wanted to turn to you. Good to see you again. Thank you for mentioning the bipartisan delegation that I led on behalf of the House Armed Services Committee with my friend, Representative Anthony Brown from Maryland. We did have an exceptionally informative visit where we highlighted the bipartisan congressional support for Ukraine, in particular the importance of countering Russian aggression. And we discussed in the briefings at the embassy the importance of defensive lethal aid in the form of javelins, which, as you both, I think you stated today, is, quote, an important strategic deterrent to Russia. And I just want to highlight on the record, I know this has been asked, the javelins were provided by the Trump administration and not the Obama administration, correct?
Oh, yes. Let's trash Obama.
I think we discussed the importance of all those security systems.
This is really amazing. I mean, I think we're all getting a sense, of, what Trump did. It's pretty clear, and we'll discuss it in more detail tomorrow. This is the last of the hearings, at least that have been scheduled so far. As far as I know, this is the end of it. And so we'll pick all this up tomorrow, and anything goes Friday. And also, Lamar Waldron's going to be with us tomorrow, and Congressman Pocan is going to be with us for an hour. So it's going to be an interesting day. Thanks so much for being with us, and get out there, get active, tag, you're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.